be very upset. Good afternoon, everyone. The meeting will now come to order, and Happy New Year. Hello, I'm Donna Savigny, President of the Board of Education, and I would like to welcome you to the January 8th, 2020 board meeting. We may have a few issues tonight with stating the right year, right? This is the first time that we're in 2020 moving forward. So in keeping with the board's commitment to open communication with the community, this meeting is being streamed live on the CCPS website at www.carrollk12.org and broadcast live on Channel 21. We are also recording this meeting so that it can be accessed on demand on our website and broadcast throughout the month on Channel 21. We would like to remind you that because this is a live broadcast, anyone who participates in the meeting needs to use a microphone. Later in the meeting, time will be provided for citizens to address the board regarding topics on the agenda or other items of concern, except for items relating to personnel. Persons wishing to address the board should fill out a blue card located on the table near the entrance to this room and pass it to the superintendent or the board president prior to the conclusion of the scheduled citizen participation. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by a moment of silence and then the national anthem. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I think she might be in the room.
Great job by our Linton Springs 4th and 5th grade chorus under the direction of Rachel McCusker, who's here with us. I'll be talking a little bit about Rachel later on in the superintendent comments as well, but another role she'll be serving. So thank you very much.
That was wonderful, and I really do love the way that we're, putting the performing arts on exhibition every month at the beginning of the meeting. It's just wonderful to celebrate. So, thank you and great job.
Thank you. They were wonderfully excited. Thank you.
Excellent. All right, board members, I need a motion for the approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Moved by Dr. Dorsey.
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Battaglia. Any comments or questions or revisions, board members, to the agenda? No? Then I will call for the vote. All those in favor? That passes unanimously. Thank you. And moving on to the approval of minutes. We have 3, and I will do each one of them separately. So first up, I need a motion for the unapproved minutes for December 4th, 2019, fiscal year 2021 operating budget work session.
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Battaglia.
Second.
Second by Mr. Kraler. Board members, any comments or changes for this set of minutes? No? Okay, then I call for the vote. All those in favor? That passes unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to the second set, I need a motion for the approval of the unapproved minutes for December 4th, 2019, students attending schools out of attendance areas work session.
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Battaglia.
Second.
Second by Mr. Kyler. Board members, any comments or revisions? No? Okay, then I'll call for the vote. All those in favor? It passes unanimously. And the third set, I need a motion for the approval of the unapproved board meeting minutes for December 11th, 2019. As revised.
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Battaglia,
Second.
second by Mr. Kyler. So board members, we did receive a revision to this just a few moments ago, just making a clarification in one of the minutes, but they will be posted in that fashion. Were there any other comments on any other part of the minutes? I did have one comment on page 8 under the discussion about the Transportation Services Benchmark Report. In the paragraph that starts, Mr. Hardesty reported, there's a sentence that says, we pay $1,000 per student that has an IEP. I think that means, I'm looking to see if Mr. Oh, there he is. Mr. Hardesty, I think that this might be misstated. It's that we receive $1,000 extra from the state for each student with an IEP.
With an IEP that requires specialized transportation.
Right.
So there's about 400 to 500 of those students each year typically. Yes,
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. I think this was just misstated in the minutes. If we just say, instead of we pay $1,000 per student, it's that we receive $1,000
We receive a grant of $1,000 per student for those that are eligible.
for those that are eligible.
Yes.
Okay. So if we can make just the changes to that one sentence, I think we'll be good. Board members, any other comments or revisions on these minutes? Okay. Then I will call for the vote on the minutes as amended. All those in favor? It passes unanimously. Thank you. Okay. So we will move on to the Carroll County Student Government Report. I will say that our student representative is conspicuously missing this evening. He had a basketball commitment with the weather changes and issues that we've had this week. He needed to be at a basketball game this evening, so he will be missed, but just wanted to make that statement. So thank you. And with that,
Hello, board members, and Happy New Year. I'm Grace Johnson, and I'm CCSGA president. CCSGA has been very busy this past month, and we are excited to share all that we've done with you. Our December General Assembly was held on Friday, December 13th from 9 to 1 at Francis Scott Key High School. At this General Assembly, we had a holiday helper theme. During the GA, we ran workshops which included a public speaking workshop entitled Naughty versus Nice Words. We had team building workshops during which student leaders needed to create the most creative holiday-themed object out of a specific amount of spaghetti, tape, string, and marshmallows. And finally, we made 45 blankets that were donated to the Carroll Hospital Pediatric Center. And going along with our holiday helper theme, we held a clothing drive across all of our schools. Students were encouraged to bring in new or gently used clothing that would be donated to our Student Services Department. We are proud to say that CCSGA filled 2 SUVs with clothing that will be given to CCPS students and families that are in need. Overall, I would say that this day was a huge success. On January 15th, we will have our officer team meeting. During this meeting, we will debrief the December GA, start planning for the annual MASC convention in Ocean City, begin planning for Advocacy Day in Annapolis, as well as start the preliminary preparations for our February GA, where we will elect our Straub-elect for the next school year. And I will provide you with more details on that event during my February report. So thank you so much for giving me the time to update you all, and have a great evening.
thank you so much, Grace. Okay, board members, with that, we will move on to section number 2, public participation. And I believe we have a few blue cards. So, Ms. Herbert.
Good evening. To have an orderly presentation of comments by the public, the following guidelines apply. Number one, citizen participation is not intended to be a question and answer session. However, if citizens have specific questions, the superintendent will assign a staff member to make contact during the board meeting to arrange to respond to questions. The superintendent will also reserve the rights to correct misinformation presented as factual and from the conclusions of the citizen participation period. I feel like I'm screaming at you all. Sorry. Number three, the statements to the board should relate to a recent agenda item, an agenda item that is expected to appear in the future, or a matter of general policy over which the board has authority. Personnel matters, pending appeals, the actions or statements of individual staff, or items related to employee negotiations are not appropriate and may not be discussed. Number four, it is the intent of the board to allow all citizens an opportunity to speak. Therefore, the board has scheduled time on the agenda for citizen participation. The board reserves the right to limit the number of speakers on a particular topic so that all topics may be addressed. If 30 minutes has passed and there are citizens who have not addressed the board, additional time may be allotted later in the evening. And number five, comments are limited to 3 minutes or less. When the allotted time expires, the speaker is permitted to complete a sentence and return to the audience. The public may not display signs or posters during the Board of Education meeting. In lieu of signs, or if you're unable to complete your comments in the allotted time, individuals are encouraged to submit remarks to the board in writing. And our first person tonight is Joe Dominic. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. So before I get to the topic that I'm here to talk about today, I would like to thank Board President Ms. Savigny for the kind words that she gave to the Carroll County Times. I think it was the first time anyone ever referred to anything I've ever done as eloquent, and I would like to thank you for that. But I'm not here as mayor tonight. I'm not here in any capacity that I serve in government. I'm here as a business owner. I reached out to Dr. Lockhart not that long ago with some questions, and we wanted to do something about it. I belong to a group of businesses, and it's a fairly new group, and I reached out to them to see if they wanted to get involved, and they overwhelmingly did. So I reached out to, so first, I represent Gage Digital Media and Maryland IT Solutions, along with my partners Brett Caligari and Corey Ditzel. I also reached out to some of the gentlemen in the back here, Andy Millman of Captain Jerry's Custom T-Shirts. We got Randy Young at Young Septic Services, Mike Stewart with Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, Michael Greiser of the Michael Greiser Group, and Greg Condon, who's not here tonight, from Condon's Auto Parts. And we wrote checks to completely cover, with about a $1,200 surplus, I think, if that's okay. If that's like an accounting problem, let me know. The Carroll County student lunch debt, and I just wanted to present this to whoever I should give this to.
Thank you. No one has ever done anything like
Point
that.
me in the right direction. At my meetings, they always hand me the check, and I never know who to give it to. So,
Wow.
Is too much money an accounting problem?
so hold on. I need Zach Tomlin from Tomlin Technologies. I'm really, really sorry. I've known him the longest out of everybody, too, and that's probably why I left him out.
Well, Mr. Dominic, thank you so much for thinking of Carroll County Public Schools and our students. This is an incredibly worthwhile thing that you've done. We're so appreciative of the community's support in paying off the outstanding lunch debt. And we gladly receive it. I'll be giving this to Mr. Hartlove in just a second, but I thought maybe we could get a quick picture, and if folks from your group who contributed would like to come up and join us for that, we would graciously accept that on behalf of our schools. Thank you so much. Thank you again. Donna, did you want to say anything? Okay.
I know, but that's okay.
That's so funny.
Okay, I need you to squeeze in tight. All right, everyone look this way, please. And one more. Thank you very much.
So, Mr. Domik, I have to say that when you first got up to speak, that was not what I was expecting to be the comment. So, oh no, absolutely. But on behalf of the Board of Education, I want to thank you for that. That is just absolutely tremendous, and we really do appreciate all the amazing partnerships and support and everything that we get from this community. So, and that was just an amazing display of what this community is all about. So thank you all so very much.
All right, and our next speaker is Gary Foote.
Good evening, Superintendent Lockhart, Commissioner Weaver, and members of the board. As we move forward with the first meeting of a new year, perhaps we should take a moment, look around, and notice who's here. Now, look again, and notice who's missing. You will mention stakeholders any number of times today, but the primary stakeholders are not here, and they almost never are. That would be the students. And you will probably also mention that at some public meeting that you attended recently, you discussed something really that was really important content, except the turnout from the public was almost non-existent. I would argue that these two items are related. We cannot expect adults to be responsible citizens in a democracy if they have never been taught. Let's fix that. Here's what I propose. Last fall, you spent a good bit of time deciding on a calendar for the year 2020-2021. Why not skip that next time and let the students decide? Imagine the board developing 3 or 4 viable calendar options for students to consider. And I mean everyone, kindergarten through 12th grade. A student old enough to come to school is old enough to be taught how to listen to proposals that affect them and then decide what they prefer. Yes, this would require presentations at every school. I would imagine there would be debate, discussion, probably some dissent. We would have to teach students how to disagree without being disagreeable. I assert that this activity would teach more about voting than anything that happens in any government class we currently offer. We wonder why our students can't think for themselves and make informed decisions. Perhaps it is because we never trust them to do just that. And I can think of other issues our students can and should decide for themselves. Dress code, cell phone policy, lunch menus, school start times, just to name a few. I listened to each of you campaign for your current board seat, and all of you extolled the virtues of thinking outside the box. Well, this is about as far outside the box as I can go for now, but it just might work. And who knows? Years from now, we might have a population of informed adults who just can't wait to attend the next school board meeting because they have finally figured out what should have been obvious all along. Elections matter, and democracy doesn't work unless citizens participate.
And that is all of our citizen participation right now.
Okay, thank you. With that, we will move on to employee groups. Ms. McCullough?
Good evening, Superintendent Lockhart, members of the Board of Education, and Commissioner Weaver, and happy 2020. I am Theresa McCullough, President of the CCEA, who represents the dedicated, hardworking teachers, counselors, RNs, speech and language providers, OTs, and PTs who make a difference in students' lives daily. I am pleased to introduce a newly formed group in CCEA known as NEAT, or the New Educator Advocacy Team, which I am pleased to say we have our leadership here tonight. This group is comprised of members who have 6 months to 10 years of experience. Not only are they a support system, but they network, plan PDs meaningful to their needs and years of experience, and they emphasize wellness and self-care and socialize. This is our future. We look forward to NEAT growing, striving, and gaining strength. And I'd like to express kudos to Celeste Jordan, who obtained skills at the NEA Leadership Summit to get this group up and running. CCEA would like to express appreciation to Superintendent Lockhart, Board of Education members Dr. Patricia Dorsey and Marcia Herbert, and Chiefs of Schools Jason Anderson, Cindy McCabe, and John O'Neill, who visited some of our classrooms during a walk a day in my shoes. Those who visited an educator were in the classroom at one time, but continue to participate in this activity to witness today's current education trends, and in some cases witnessed what our teachers deal with, as in behaviors, discipline, schedule changes, and attendance issues, just to mention a few. Perhaps they even visited another grade level that they didn't have any experience in, or content area that they weren't familiar with. Here are some recaps. From Tina Baker, special educator at Winfield Elementary. John O'Neill's, and I quote, "John O'Neill's visit went great. He jumped right in and actually got down on the floor, interacted, and played with my kiddos. Dr. Lockhart's visit with Stacy Nolan went so well, she was assigned as acting assistant principal at Liberty High School."
That was before my visit, just for the record.
I have it covered. Seriously, though, for the home audience and you social media specialists, she was appointed that position at last month's Board of Education meeting prior to the shadow activity. So often, we share testimonials and make asks for additional funding. This was a perfect opportunity for our funding authorities to experience firsthand some of our needs. The Teacher Shadow event was an excellent way to share how our taxes are being used when it comes to education, which we all know is a large part of the county budget. We wanted our elected officials, especially at the county level, to take note of why CCPS ranks high in Park. We wanted our elected officials at the county level to witness why CCPS received an excellent rating in the recent Maryland School Report Card. We wanted our elected officials to understand why CCPS has additional positions in the budget, such as more special educators, a school psychologist, just to mention a few. We wanted our elected officials to understand why the Kirwan Commission's blueprint for Maryland's future should be supported in the current General Assembly. Unfortunately, some other elected officials who have never been in the classroom declined the invitation. That's not to say we might run it again in the spring. All 5 elected Board of Education members, 3 county commissioners, and District 9's Delegate Trent Kittleman attended Saturday's legislative breakfast. CCEA takes the opportunity to share our legislative priorities and how these bills will affect Carroll County schools, our jobs, and the students. One might ask yourself, I didn't hear the District 5 Carroll delegation mentioned. It is unfortunate that District 5 was not represented when Carroll educators and constituents were presenting priorities that will affect education in Carroll County. CCEA invited them to attend to focus on Carroll County, not Montgomery County, not Prince George's County, and not Baltimore City. I suppose, in a sense, Keep It Carroll County is fitting for another setting. What message was sent by these elected officials not attending the legislative breakfast. Absences and silence speaks volumes. Once again, it's all about commitment, public official obligations, priorities, and values when it comes to educating our students. Finally, a sincere thank you to all who supported educators and students by attending these events. Please save the date for the upcoming Read Across America, which has taken a new theme called Reading from Sea to Shining Sea. And it's scheduled for March 7th and is being held in the Belk area of the Town Hall. You'll be getting more information about that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. McCullough. Ms. Steele? Not tonight. Okay. Okay, great. So glad. All right, are there any other employee groups present who would like to speak? No? Okay. Then with that, we will move on to board member and superintendent updates. So board members, we'll start with activities and correspondence. Ms. Herbert.
Oh, right. I have a little slideshow because I did do a walk in my shoes, and hope you all had a wonderful holiday and hope we're all ready to go back to work. So last month I traveled to Spring Garden Elementary, and I was very fortunate to, just stay right there for 1 second, to go to Mrs. McAndrews' class. I walked in, and the principal was there, and 4 other teachers, and the first thing out of the principal's mouth was, "Oh, Miss Herbert, I'm so glad you didn't come yesterday. This is the first day, today is the first day of the whole week," and this was Friday, "that we did not have to call the health department. The day before, they had 89 students out." I wanted to turn around, put a gas mask on, and put rubber gloves on and go back in my car. But I didn't, and I went on and went to class. So when I walked in, she was working on red folders, and she had other students that weren't working on red folders in stations. And here was a little station here, and this young man here had just got to Spring Garden that week, and I would have never known that he was a new student in that class. There were 8 absent that day, and she just rolled right along like it was a new day. The thing I'd like for you to look at this slide was, if you take notice, she has an apron on. I thought that was one of the cleverest things for a first grade teacher to have. She had pens, she had pencils, she had erasers, she had markers in there. It was absolutely amazing what that teacher carried around and did not have to go back to a desk or another part of her area where she taught. But she kept that apron on the whole time without Kleenex, and she was spot on with that. She would reach in and pull out Scotch tape or paper. It was amazing what she did there. So the next, you can go ahead now. There she is. So we were upstairs looking at doing word sounds first. Then she goes and turns the lights off and gets out a flashlight and then works on new word sounds. And we can go to the next one. And she had a captive audience all day. She was just like the Energizer Bunny. So then we went on, and then after you're doing all these little stations, you've got to do some wiggle time. So she did a wiggle time before the next station, and they were all jumping around, and she played music, and she was wiggling with them. And then they went on, then she read a book. It was about a roller coaster ride. And then after she completed that, and it was a question and answer period along with her talking and reading the story, then she went on, and then they had another. This was Simon Says time. So this was a matter of several hours that I had visited there. And go ahead, Ms. Brenda. This was one of the end things she had the students do. And this was one of the SIT team's ideas or objectives for the year, was to reevaluate everyone once a week on Friday to assess their reading. So she had several groups, and it was amazing how she could take those 20 students, and they were on a task, the other group was on a task, and just kept working. It was absolutely amazing. And then at the end, after she did an assessment, they took a little test. And I thought that was so clever how she made those little boxes and everybody just filled out their paper. But I'm telling you, kudos to Miss McAndrews because she had a evaluation at 10:15 and I was glad she had it then because I left. I was ready to take a nap. She never stopped. And I am telling you, that's why we have great scores in Carroll County. We have teachers going full tilt all day, very organized, so positive, and she called them all the time, her awesome first graders. And she told the class when I was there, she goes, now you all know you weren't awesome when you got in here the very first day or two, but you are my awesome first graders. And she continued to say that on and on those several hours that I was there. It was just a wonderful experience. I left. I wanted to get in some kind of sanitation cream and all that, and I didn't get sick. But I tell you what, kudos to Miss McAndrews because she is just going unbelievable, full tilt all day. So that's it.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Herbert. Was it Dr. Dorsey? You want to go next?
Sure. Well, Happy New Year, everyone. December 12th, I attended the joint meeting with our Board of Commissioners, and later that evening, I visited the Judy Center at Cranberry Station Elementary, where for the evening, the students were involved in making gingerbread houses. So thanks to Mrs. Jarbo and her staff members for making the evening enjoyable and filled with learning in a fun way. And also thanks to the parents and the community for being engaged in the activity. On December 13th, I attended the ETM meeting, and during the ETM meeting, we had some time set aside for some professional development. And our professional development for that meeting centered around having courageous conversations. And it was based on the work of a person named Glenn Singleton. And again, just very, very worthwhile information to have in mind when you're trying to have conversations basically about race. So again, I found that to be a very helpful meeting for myself and I think some of the other members as well. Later on that day, I had the opportunity to stop by Francis Scott Key, and I visited with the Student Government Association just for a while. I attended the team building workshop for middle schoolers and the Naughty Words workshop as well. And I also visited the classroom where students were involved in preparing the blankets as a service learning project. So again, kudos to our Student Government Association members. On the 14th of December, I attended the Roar of the Robots. Again, another very, very worthwhile day for our students, and it was very exciting to see and feel the synergy as students were demonstrating their robots. December 17th, I too attended a Teacher Shadow Day, a walk a day in my shoes. And even though it's been said that certainly I've walked many days in a teacher's shoes and an administrator's shoes, it was revealing and refreshing to take a new look. I would like to thank Mrs. Tiffany Stuber for welcoming me into her Manchester Elementary classroom and allowing me to be a part of the instruction for the day. And certainly I thank her wonderful students who gave me a glimpse of their world. My takeaways from the visit, first of all, in my opinion, education remains the #1 profession. Interacting with students and staff members is very, very rewarding. Secondly, there are many challenges facing our teachers today. With the snow-related school closing the day before my visit, which also happened to be an IEP meeting day, there was consideration given to rescheduling the meetings that were to be held the day before at Manchester Elementary, and the special ed team had to spend some time together collaborating on adjusting their schedules for the meetings, and then they had a student they were trying to work into their schedules, and just listening as they collaborated on how best to accommodate a new student's schedule was very, very interesting. During my visit, there were push-ins and pull-out services provided. There were many, many things that happened during the course of the day. And in fact, the day started for Mrs. Stuber right at 7:30 in the morning, and by 4:30 she was bundling her things together and leaving. So she really put in a full day. But there were discussions throughout the day, some time for collaboration. There was a call for the teacher to attend a student services discussion. There was a student meltdown. There was the town's fire siren. I mean, there were just many, many situations that had to be dealt with in a day. And through it all, Mrs. Stuber demonstrated patience and certainly support of her students. And by the end of her 9-hour day, she was gathering her materials so she could be on her way to get her child from daycare. So in summary from that, I really learned anew or saw anew that instructional decisions certainly have to be made constantly. So it definitely is a need for us to make sure we have qualified staff members in our classrooms and staff members who really do have the children's best interest at heart. And I guess the final takeaway is that we really do have to problem solve and make decisions that will support our special ed students and staff, because the workload, as demonstrated that particular day, is certainly tremendous. On the 19th of December, I had the pleasure of attending a few holiday gatherings, and then I ended my day at Robert Moton. I was not a part of, but I visited as their winter concert was presented. So I'd like to thank Mr. Robbins, the music teachers and staff at Robert Moton for sharing the students' musical talents with the school body and community. On December 20th, I had the honor of meeting with the Lieutenant Governor, Governor Boyd Rutherford, and staff to tour East Middle and to have a discussion of the school. So I certainly give many thanks to Principal James Carver for engaging this whole entourage of folks in a tour of the building and a discussion of student needs. And we really went through that building quickly. I mean, it was quite a pace going through and seeing everything there. On the 3rd of January, I attended the legislative breakfast at Schalk Auditorium. And then finally, on January 4th, the CCEA legislative breakfast. And again, I certainly do give many thanks to CCEA for, again, sponsoring that and sharing their legislative priorities for the year. So I think that sums it up for me.
Thank you, Dr. Dorsey. Ms. Taglit?
So first of all, wonderful that we are in and now in a new decade. I think it's incredible, and you know, it's always interesting to see what the future will bring. And it's kind of cool that my little one, I'm like, it's a new decade. She's like, what's that? I'm like, well, I ain't going to explain it to you. Watch Friends. You'll figure it out. 10 years. There you go. So it was just nice that we're finally back into the swing of things, back in school. Everyone's getting back to a routine. December 12th, we had the joint meeting. December 17th, I attended the North Carroll Middle School Holiday Band Concert, which was phenomenal. They had that at Man Valley. And it was really neat to see all the middle schoolers like really excited to be up on a high school stage. So they actually were, it was really cool. And my son was like, "Did you see me up there?" I'm like, "Yes, I saw you. You're all the way in the back playing drums. Great. Just stay back there. Don't try to be anything special. Just sit there." So it was really, just, I like having the middle school activities and the high schools and seating for all the families. So I started getting back to visiting the schools. I did that on January 2nd. I visited Freedom Elementary, Piney Ridge Elementary, and Linton Springs. Then we had the Chamber of Commerce breakfast on January 3rd, CCEA legislative breakfast on the 4th, and then January 6th we had our East Middle School Construction Planning Committee. I was supposed to visit Sykesville Middle today, but due to snow that got canceled, so I'm going to try to reschedule that for next week. So I'm getting back into the swing. It's kind of nice. It's kind of like slow down a little bit in my work, so I'm able to do more on the Board of Ed side of things, which I really enjoy doing. So I'm excited to see what is going on in our schools. just real quick, make sure everybody gets your Teacher of the Year in, and I know it's coming up soon. It's really fairly coming fast. So get all those in, and if you want to do 4-H, sign up. That's coming up too.
So, Ms. Gaddis, on that note, what is the deadline for submitting nominations for Teacher of the Year? This coming Monday. Okay, so thank you for that reminder, Mr. Taglit. Mr. Kraler?
And I attended several of the things that that we're very fortunate to have an active board, and while all of us do not make it to everything, the majority make it to a lot of things, and I think that's super. We had our joint meeting with the county commissioners, which all of them have gone very well with a lot of discussion and some good presentations. I did breakfast at Career and Tech and got to see the staff serve food and work, not just the students. Went to the robotics tournament at the community college, and that was awesome to walk around and see what all they were doing. And there were a lot of people there. There was a commissioner there or two, and a lot of people from the community there watching that. I think that was as nice as seeing the presentation, to see the people that were really interested in being there and seeing it. Went to East Middle concert at Winters Mill, and it started out with Winters Mills, the instrumental group doing just a little brief thing before the East Middle did their thing, and that was great. On the 19th, the superintendent's holiday gathering here, the luncheon, and that was neat to see the Career and Tech kids, culinary students, and they actually set the menu, did the work, served the food, and were graded for it. That was I thought that was neat that he decided to make that a project where they got graded. And there were other holiday parties, and that was all neat and nice. And the Chamber of Commerce legislative breakfast, the CCEA one, and nice presentations there, and they actually allowed each of us to talk too, so thank you. Monday, I was down at MABE in Annapolis, the Legislative Committee, and I just wanted to mention quickly, the Legislative Committee, and John O'Neill goes, and Ms. Herbert and myself, and you really do get a lot of updates and a lot of interesting comments on Kerwin, on their positions, on coming legislation. I try to share in emails when it gets something I think it's worth everybody seeing. That was followed up by the Federal Relations Network Committee, which is another committee MABE has, and we actually go to D.C. in the first week of February and visit congressmen and senators there. And I wanted to mention that if anybody has any thoughts, I mean, please email me if you have anything that you think we ought to try to include in what we tell people there and what we push for. They're talking about federal stuff that can help the states with stuff like Kerwin, and I don't know how well we get listened to by everybody there, and whether we see the lowest level of somebody's staff or we really see people that are attentive, but it's a great opportunity. If anybody has any thoughts they'd like to let me know. I'll definitely bring it up to the committees. And then that afternoon was the East Middle Construction Planning Committee, and that has gone really well. This is the first one. I was on Career and Tech, but at the end. This is the first one I've been on from the beginning, and we're doing meetings 2 hours and spend the 2 hours. The faculty, the parents, and the principal are very engaged, and it's we're probably going to have to add a meeting or two to get it all done. It's a lot of input and a lot of stuff, and well handled by staff, and it's been, I don't know if it's typical, it's been very well attended. It's been the parents and teachers and the principal are there every time. You can tell they've talked to other teachers between the meetings and gathered input. It's really, really a positive experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kraler. And we're running very long on time, so I'm going to go very quickly, but we had a lot of year-end activities, a lot of great holiday parties and recognitions, and it was fun to be out and about with folks. Commissioner Weaver, I want to thank you for a very productive joint meeting with the commissioners on December 12th. I think We touched on a lot of subjects in that meeting. It was very good to have the 5-year budget discussions where we're in alignment. I think the relationship with the commissioners has been building over the last 2 years, and I think it continues to. I know they're joking a little bit over here, but I really do appreciate the open dialogue and the transparency that we've been able to have with the commissioners, and I'm very excited about what that's going to mean for going into the next year and this next budget cycle. So thank you for that.
That will be great going into that with the collaboration we have. And I mentioned Saturday morning at the CCA breakfast that the collaboration we have here between the Board of Education, between the commissioners, we all discuss everything. And even legislators we are talking to all the time about the issues, and it's really makes life very easy when we communicate.
Right. Thank you for that. And, you know, we are in the season now, with a lot of legislative breakfasts going on, and I do appreciate the event that CCA put on Saturday and the ability to talk to you all. And I know that I had a great discussion with Ms. Jordan afterwards. We have a couple of topics that we're going to be looking into, so appreciate that as well. And with that, I think, oh, I also did want to say that, you know, we're entering the season where there's lots of weather issues that always make fun and very, very crazy decisions going on during the season. So I do know that I was on a business trip and thought I was going to miss my son's concert for the holiday season, and because school was actually closed on that day, I was actually able to get home and still make it to that concert in December, so that one actually worked out in my favor this time. But Dr. Lockhart, I know you're going to be making a few comments a little bit later about some of the issues that we face with weather-related decisions that have to be made. So with that, I'll hand it over to you for the superintendent's report.
Thank you, Ms. Savigny. I'll go ahead and make those right now. I'll clarify that I don't know if the adjective I'd use to describe making those decisions is fun. Can be a little crazy and hectic for sure, but I did want to just take a minute to talk about today's inclement weather. And certainly first, I want to apologize for the inconvenience and conditions that were faced in some parts of the county today during the start of schools by our families and our staff members. I want to reiterate that we do gather as much information as we can, coordinate among our departments and with county agencies. We have our staffs out on roads, examining conditions, and then we do make the best decisions based on the conditions and the time that we have to make that decision. In general, we typically do a very good job in the process and things work out well. Obviously, the timing of things this morning was not one of the cases where everything worked out so well. When we received the National Weather Service warning and the issue of passing squalls this morning, we already had our first tier of school buses out. That includes high schools and 3 elementary schools as a part of that first tier. They were already on the road, with some students being actively picked up, many others at bus stops waiting for their buses. We also considered that many parents of students in the second tier of schools, which is our middle schools and 3 additional elementary schools, may have already been leaving for work or en route to their routine. And so all of these I just want to share, not as excuses, but all of them are additional safety factors we weigh in the difficult decision that has to be made, and as always, safety is the top consideration. So even though I believe the scenario today was somewhat unique, I also understand we can continue to improve. And while I can't change the timing of the weather, there are things that we can learn and carry forward and also explore whether there are any changes or tweaks that we might be able to make to our processes or practices moving forward. I got a lot of feedback today about some of those things. I do appreciate that, but I will be taking the necessary time with staff to debrief on the event today and consider some of those possible tweaks or changes to that process. And I appreciate everybody's patience and understanding.
And Dr. Lockhart, if you don't mind my just adding a couple of comments. I do know that we as board members end up getting a lot of feedback and comments as well from community members, basically wanting to say, like, okay, we're not actually involved in those decisions, nor should we be involved in those decisions. Those are, as you say, made by a lot of feet on the ground and a lot of information that's coming in at the time from our transportation folks and a lot of staff members. So we appreciate the effort that goes into that. But I appreciate your comments about the elementary bells and, you know, the fact that the buses were already en route and we have 3 elementary schools. You know, there were a lot of parents writing to us saying, why didn't you just close schools at that time when you knew that it was happening? And we say, well, we can't do that. There were already kids on buses, elementary age kids, where their parents have already left for work. We can't just turn around and take them home and drop them off because there are situations where parents may no longer be home. We need to give parents a 2-hour warning at least, right, on making sure that there is someone at home. So I appreciate you making those comments, and so safety is certainly of utmost importance in all of our minds for our kids, but today was an extenuating circumstance and something that simply couldn't be planned for.
That's right. The timing was the challenge today
Right.
of that, and I appreciate that.
Right, and I think every time we enter into the winter season, the questions will come up about, you know, there's a Hereford zone for other counties, and, you know, could we have a North Carroll zone? I know those questions always happen, but there's a lot of discussions that have to be had, and, you know, that we have issues with bus routes and feeder patterns and things that it would cost a fairly significant additional amount of money from a transportation perspective to split those zones. So, I mean, as you said, it's certainly something that we can always go back and revisit those every year with new information.
Right. But we also have students attending specialized programs across the county as well. And so that factors in why it's not so easy just to say we're going to close these schools or close these schools. So,
Right.
But in terms of reflection and moving forward, you know, every event like this is a learning opportunity, and we'll take all the information we gleaned today, and like I said, re-examine some of our processes and practices to be as efficient in terms of safety and that we can be for our families and our staff members.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, on to some kudos here. Maryland School Counselors of the Year. I'm very excited to begin this evening by announcing that 2 of the 3 recently named Maryland School Counselors of the Year from the state of Maryland are from here in Carroll County Public Schools. Kristen Cavey from Winners Mill was selected as the High School Counselor of the Year, and Kathleen McCormick from East Middle is the Middle School Counselor of the Year. The Maryland School Counselor Association presents these awards for counseling innovations and exemplary comprehensive school counseling programs. Criteria for the awards include leadership and advocacy initiatives and contributions to student outcomes. Both Kristen and Kathleen have been instrumental in implementing the Sources of Strength program that I know you've heard about. They've helped implement those at their schools, and they're going to receive their awards at the State Conference National School Counseling Week Gala on Friday, February 7th. So congratulations to Kristen and Kathleen and Carroll County Public Schools. 2 of the 3 Counselors of the Year are from here in CCPS. I'm also proud to share that Northwest Middle School has been recognized as an Excellence in Gifted and Talented Education School for Maryland. That acronym is EGATE, because we love acronyms, right? This program honors exceptional elementary, middle, and high schools that offer gifted and talented programs aligned with the Maryland Criteria for Excellence, Gifted and Talented Program Guidelines, and the Code of Maryland Regulations. Schools were required to submit a comprehensive portfolio which provided documentation of 21 different criteria under 4 program objectives. So it was a pretty rigorous task, and these schools serve as models for others seeking to achieve EGATE status or improve their school programs and services. So congratulations to everyone at Northwest for that recognition. Next, I'd like to congratulate Michael Duffy. He's here with us this evening, our Supervisor of Athletics. He has been elected to serve as the President of the Maryland Public Secondary Schools Athletic Association, MPSSAA, another acronym, for the 2020-21 and 2021-22 school years. This organization works with the Maryland State Department of Education and the 24 local school systems to provide interscholastic participation opportunities for more than 111,000 student athletes at 198 high schools. As president, Michael will work to carry out the philosophy and purposes of MPSSAA by making interscholastic athletics part of the entire educational program and developing programs to promote physical and mental safety, fair competition, and sportsmanship. So congratulations, Michael. We know you'll represent Carroll County Public Schools very well in your role as president of MPSSAA. Finally, we'll come back to Rachel McCusker. She is a vocal music teacher at Linton Springs Elementary School, and you saw her outstanding work with her outstanding students here on display this evening. She also was elected by her peers to fill the newly created teacher member position on the State Board of Education. We are all very proud that the first, yes, we're all very proud that the first teacher chosen for the State Board position is coming from Carroll County Public Schools. Rachel has a strong record of leadership, advocacy, working collaboratively, and fighting for a broad, inclusive, student-focused vision of public education. She's a passionate and committed educator, and I know she's going to do an outstanding job serving as a voice for teachers throughout the state. So congratulations and best wishes, Rachel, as you begin your new position January 28th at the next state board meeting, right? Okay. That concludes my comments, and I wish everyone a Happy New Year.
Thank you, Dr. Lockard. And we do have one school week recognition. Mr. Kraler?
And this piggybacks the report we just heard. This is National School Counseling Week. National School Counseling Week will be celebrated this week. This year's theme is School Counselors, Helping Build Better Humans. The week highlights the unique contributions of school counselors and the tremendous impact they have in helping our students achieve success in school and plan for a career. We have a tremendous counseling program and appreciate the many dedicated and talented school counselors in our school system.
Thank you. Okay, and with that, we'll move on to Section 4 with presentations. And first up is the NFHS Athletics Streaming.
Okay, I'm going to call our Director of High Schools, Mr. Eric King, up to the podium to, or the table, I'm sorry, to introduce our guests, along with Mr. Duffy, and kick off this presentation.
So good evening. It is my pleasure to introduce our now president, Mr. Michael Duffy, our supervisor of athletics, and Ms. Kiki Underly from NFHS. And I'm going to let them do most of the talking because they're the experts on this, but I'm very excited about what this can do for our student athletes, our parents, our communities, and really a lot of times our extended families because the access they'll have to watch their kids participate. And there's a lot of other benefits. So with that, Kiki, the floor is yours.
Great. Good evening, and thank you for allowing Play on Sports, which is part of the NFHS network, to be here and to share a little bit with you about who we are and what we do. So my background actually is in education, so it's been a long time. I was at a board meeting. I spent 18 years in education as a teacher and a coach and an athletic administrator, and moved over to sales, no less, with the National Federation of High School. And okay, good. I just want to make sure I could get this through. For those of you who are not familiar, the NFHS is the National Federation of High School. It is very similar to what the NCAA is to collegiate sports. The National Federation of High School is a governing body of high school athletics across the country. So it's very similar to that with the role of what the NCAA plays in collegiate sports. Play on Sports, which is the company that I am from, partnered with the NFHS, as well as the state athletic associations across the country, 47 of them to be exact, Maryland State Athletic Association being one of them, with the president being sitting here next to me now. And we partnered with them to create the NFHS network. So the NFHS network is a live streaming platform where high schools across the country live stream their events, whether they be athletic events or non-athletic events. They could be a play, they could be a chorus, they could be graduation, they could be pep rallies, they could be assemblies that you host in the school. Anything that you want to stream to your page on the network, that is who the NFHS network is. So very proudly, I could say I work for one of the largest broadcasting platforms for high school sports across the country. For several years, we have been working with schools to start a school broadcast program, and that school broadcast program was mainly done through a manual production, meaning students with a handheld camera, laptop computer, using our software, and that's how they were streaming content to the network. As we all know in high school world, for a high schooler or a middle schooler, their lives are very busy. So what was happening was we had a lot of schools on the network using the manual production. However, students, had other obligations. They had jobs. They couldn't get there to film a game, or they couldn't get there to film an assembly or something in robotics. So we partnered with a company called Pixelot, and the Pixelot is an automated production system. So I want to be clear that the schools that are a part of our school broadcast program have the choice, and many today use both, doing manual production, which is very much student-driven, and then the automated production, because we just can't have students be at every event. So when you start covering one sport, then there's a need and a desire, well, how come we're not covering the other sports? And this is where our partnership with Pixelot, which is the hardware-software company that we partnered with 2.5 years ago, has really changed the playing field of live streaming across the country. So this is just a little overview. I don't like to put too many words on slides because I think people kind of get lost at reading things, but this is just an overview of pictures of what the system looks like. I mean, basically, it's 2 lenses, HD lens cameras that are encased in a shell, and that gets mounted, as you can see, in the gymnasium. It gets mounted to a wall right at mid-court. And in many cases, we can also install these outside where they're mounted at a multi-purpose field. With the system comes a computer, which is basically a simple desktop tower that houses the software, the Pixelot software. The cabinet that you see there also comes with the system. It's just basically a computer rack. It locks the computer. You can mount this on a wall. You can mount this in an office or a storage closet. The only thing we need schools to provide, and you can see in that picture, is an outlet for the computer to be powered. We provide everything else: the computer, the cabinet, the camera, the cables that connect the camera to the computer, as well as a scoreboard device that pulls the data from the scoreboard and embeds it into a stream. So as I've mentioned, the Pixelot system is completely automated. There is no one needed to operate the camera. There is no one needed to operate the computer. No one needs to go turn it on. Once we are powered, once the unit has been calibrated, and the game has been scheduled, or an assembly has been scheduled, or a graduation has been scheduled, that communicates to our system to allow it to turn on. So being a former athletic director, our days really start at 3 o'clock. And the last thing, we want to take as much responsibility away from the athletic director so that this is automated. They don't need to worry about, do I have a kid here to film the game? Do we have a parent to film the game? Did we bring all of our equipment down? It's already there. So let's just look at a few footage of some high school events that are automated with the Pixelot system.
Inside, he tries to squeeze a pass to Soy, stripped away. Fast break the other way. Nice pass up ahead, and Malvin Paierro lays it off the glass. Paierro has got 8. He's knocked down 4 of 5 shots. He's knocked on all deuce tries. Here's a nice move inside, cutting in. Nathan Pack off the glass.
So again, no one turned the system on. No one was operating a camera. Nobody was operating a computer. The algorithm that is built for every sport does that magic of what it just did, where it was tracking the motion up and down the court, and at times you saw it very subtly zooming in. You also noticed that we had someone announcing the game. Coming from education myself, there's nothing more than I love than having the student involvement and having them be a part of the broadcast. So you lose a little bit of it with the Pixelot system, but you saw in that last footage there was an adult who was doing play-by-play. That can easily be students doing play-by-play commentating through that event. Let's look at some more. Now, this obviously is an outdoor venue. We do not have anyone doing play-by-play, but you can hear the surround sound. You see the feed from the scoreboard. Nothing is done any differently than what the athletic directors would be doing at a game. So we have a device that literally pulls that data from the scoreboard and embeds it into the stream. Here's another one. Maybe. Yeah, right down to the left. Thanks, Brenda. So there is an algorithm for every sport, with the exception of wrestling, which would be just a thick shot of the mat. But you could see the camera very subtly right there zooming in and then panning back out again. Any questions so far before I move on to the offer that we have for Carroll County? So what is our goal? PlayOn's goal is to spread as wide as we possibly can across the country and to work with different school districts and counties like yourself. I did put a little 2020 gift up there for all of you, which was a pen and a koozie, and also there's a piece of paper in there that shows you some of the counties that we have closed across the country. Currently, right now, we have over 4,000 units out, and we expect to have that doubled within a year. In Maryland, just to get into the home ground of Maryland and what we're doing, we have closed Anne Arundel County, we have closed Montgomery County, we've closed Baltimore County, and we're really excited about working with Carroll County. We are in serious conversations with Prince George, Prince George, which I know is near here. We expect to have that closed by the end of this week, and we are in several conversations with other counties in Maryland. So as we mentioned, being affiliated with the NFHS as well as your State Athletic Association in Maryland, there is a lot of support to how we continue to grow across the country. And the offer that we have been making to counties such as yourself is that we are going to provide 2 units, 2 Pixelot systems at no cost for the district. The only thing that we need from the district is to have the power, that outlet to that computer, and we need to have internet to that computer. Why internet? Why a hardwire? Because we want it to be as effective and not buffer, and so that you're not trying to figure out what's wrong with the program when you're watching it. So the internet connection is going to give a way more stable connection for the stream than running off of a Wi-Fi. So again, 2 units at no cost for each school. Ideally, we'd like to put 1 unit on your indoor facilities and 1 unit on your outdoor facilities. We are going to give you everything that you need to be up and running. So why work with the network? And I can tell you I've been with the company now for 3 years, but the people that I work for, who are great people, have been doing this for quite some time. Live streaming is not an easy road. They have spent a good solid 8 to 10 years working this out and working with live streaming. As I said, their bread and butter was doing manual production for a very long time. They have gone through all the bumps and hurdles that they need to. The functionality. I always say this to people, I love what I do with the network. If I ever went back to education, there's no doubt I would want this in my schools. And I'd want it in my schools certainly for the ease of use, that I don't have to worry as an athletic director of running up there and getting it on. The service that it provides the community for parents who can't always be at an event, or for relatives who aren't going to drive an hour or an hour and a half to see their freshman grad son playing a basketball game. Great for coaches. So there's the whole live streaming component of it, which makes so much sense in the world that we live in today. But the coaching tools that we provide through the NFHS network and through the Pixelot system is incredible. So we always talk about coaches and the field, the playing field being an extension of the classroom, and how many coaches are using film to help teach their student athletes. about things that they're doing well in the game, things that they need to work on. So there's all of that component that we can certainly talk about, but I'm going to move on to other things. The price for 2 units. It was $10,000 for 2 units at one time. We knocked it down probably about a year and a half ago to $5,000. $5,000 for 2 units, one-time fee for those schools. For you guys in Carroll County and all the other counties that you see on that piece of paper, we are offering 0 costs for those counties. So why? Why are we offering 0 costs? My mother always said there's no such thing as a free lunch. We're able to do that because our business model is through a subscription platform. So we charge consumers to watch the events. That's where we make, our money, and that's where schools make money. Our investors wanted us to push our platform out at a faster pace, and we were able to do this when we work with counties such as yourself. And when we close counties such as Montgomery and Baltimore and Anne Arundel, they start to see the effect of that network because it's not just in 1 school or 2 schools, it's now in all of their schools. So when one school basketball team goes to another school and there's a system there as well, that's streaming as well to the network. So it's a really nice network that is created for your county. Subscription, what does it cost? So a monthly pass is $10.99 for a month. Anyone who buys a monthly subscription is going to be able to watch anything across the network. So if I have a grandson here in Carroll County, I can watch him play, and if I have a granddaughter in Connecticut, I can also watch her play. So I get anything I want across the network, across the country for 1 month, as well as state championship events. Annual passes are $69.95. Again, for a whole year, I can watch whatever I want on the network. So very quickly, on the monthly passes, schools are generating revenue back from both passes. On the monthly, 10%, and on the annual, the network gets $50 and the school gets $19.95. Schools have the ability to mark up the annual pass and keep anything over the $50. So subscriptions provide all content. So in the offer that we have for the schools, or for the county, Carroll County, we would keep subscription for the first 3 years of a 5-year agreement. So for the first 3 years, the network is going to keep all revenue to recoup their loss. At the start of year 4, we start to share with the school. So at the end of every quarter, we write a check back to the school in how much revenue that they generated. So it's very similar to buying a ticket at the gate. It's like an extension of your gate at some of your events that you charge to get into. If there is a school in Carroll County that said, you know what, we really want to start generating revenue right away in year 1, we are willing to do that for $1,000, one time only, per school. Typically, when we sell, if we do this with some schools where it may be a smaller group, it's usually $2,500, but we're willing to give that to your schools in Carroll County at $1,000 per school, one time. And that would not necessarily mean that all the schools would have to do that. Currently, right now, in Maryland, we do not have one county who's taking that option. They're all going to wait to year 4 to start sharing that revenue. Any questions? Yes?
2 things. I'm a hockey coach. How can I get back and see that film myself? And what does that cost that coach?
So coaches have access to content in something called Console, which is our content management system. So every athletic director, it's called Console. Console is where games would be scheduled. That's where all the content would be stored. So the schools, you guys own your content, which is important to know. Okay? Mm-hmm. You own your content. So the athletic director of that school would go into Console, and he or she would enter in all of the coaches in a drop-down menu. And that coach would get a game link of that game film probably 45 minutes to an hour after the game. All right. So I would get that game film, just like I would if somebody was filming it and they sent it to me. They can then download that game film and use it for any coaching software that they use, which I'm assuming everyone here is using Huddle.
Okay, and do you have problems with them coming out of focus?
I'll be quite honest with you. Initially, and I always like to say this to the schools, in the front end of all of this, athletic directors need to have a little bit of an investment, meaning they need to know how to operate console and schedule their events. They need to know who do I call if there's a problem and it needs to be recalibrated, or maybe we need to replace it. So there is a little bit on the athletic directors on the front end where they need to roll up their sleeves a little bit and invest, a good month into learning about the system. We are going to provide training. We are going to provide support. There are no hidden costs at all in that. So we're never going to say, oh, this training is going to be $500 for this school, or the storage for this video is going to be $1,000. There literally is no cost to the Carroll County schools. We are going to come out. We are going to do site visits. We are going to do installation. We are going to calibrate all the units. We are going to do a training. And we're going to make sure all the schools know exactly what they are doing so that we are up and running. So let's say the first week we're seeing some blurriness in a basketball game. We need to know about that, and we need the ADs to tell us so that we can go in and we can fix that. And sometimes there are those glitches that we need to get through in the first month and make sure we're up and running. So, yeah.
And I would just want to add that we, as a system, have been working with other systems for the past 6 months to look at this as a school system, look at the benefits that it can provide our families who can't be at a game, and really see how it can benefit both our students, our families, and our athletic programs. And that's really what we want to focus on is the great communication and connection that this can provide for people who can't necessarily be physically present for the activities of their students.
Is a delay or editing process in this?
There is probably about a 2-minute delay for the people who are watching it either on their phone or on their computers. That's it.
What about editing?
So we talked a little bit when I started. We talked about the manual component, and I'm not sure how many of the schools have some kind of broadcast program in the schools, but this is a great segue to starting one, because every athletic director who will have access to console where their game films are stored can send a game film to, let's say, a broadcasting teacher who can then clip it, edit it, do a highlight film, add announcing after the fact, and then upload it to a local TV station that you guys, I think you guys have a local TV station here. They can upload that to that after the fact. So there's tons of things that you can do with that content.
So basically we're saying we have 7 high schools. We would get 2 units at each one of those 7 high schools, assuming one would be gym and one would be an outdoor field for those 2
Our
locations.
expectation would be the gym of each school in the stadium field. And that's not going to hit every single sport, we understand, but that's going to hit a large number of them. Additionally, one of the things I think we need to consider is the need by which our athletic programs are funded through gate revenue. Having spoken with the athletic directors, we do not foresee this being an issue as far as negatively impacting the ability to run our athletic programs. We don't think people who want to go see high school sports want to go see high school sports. People would rather, again, assuming weather's nice, people want to be at high school sports. If it's a pouring rain game, people might stay home and get that subscription, but for the most part, our parents and student fans and community fans who want to see our games want to go and see our games. So we don't feel that this is going to eat into that revenue fund as far as the people who help to fund our athletic programs to the gate to our gate receipts.
Okay. I would just like to add to Mr. Duffy's statement. We did a study in Georgia to show he's absolutely right. The people who want to be at a high school event are going to be at a high school event. Most people feel that way. It's really the people who are outside a 25-mile radius who are watching these events. And we have done some studies in Georgia. We just did one in Pennsylvania recently to show where are people, where are they when they're watching these events. And a good percentage of them are outside a 25-mile radius. This is really for the people who can't get there. So if I'm stuck in an airport on a business trip and my son's playing at 4 o'clock, I'm probably going to pay the $10.99 to watch him play. And it gives that service to people. I love the fact that it gives service to some of your alumni, people who've graduated from here, who are still connected to the kids who are playing, and maybe they had a great season and they're off in college and they want to watch some of these games. The community in general here in Carroll County to do it. I think it's a great coaching tool for your coaches. I think it just brings them to a whole other level. I think we do have a few slides on the coaching functionality. I won't get too deep into this, but basically there's going to be an app. There's an app right now, and they're using it where coaches can go on an app and turn it on for practice. It's kept private, so it's not live streaming to the public. And they can clip it for 10 minutes. They can clip it for an hour. They can set the direction of the camera, whether they want it just to be on the left side, the right side, or they want it to be automated up and down the court or up and down the field. So this is great tools for your coaches to have and to use.
So there's definitely no long-term like maintenance contracts or anything like that. There's no cost to
No. So we are going to retain ownership of the equipment, obviously. It's a 5-year agreement. So throughout the course of that 5 years, let's say, you know, the computer's faulty, it's just not working. We're going to replace it at no cost to you guys. There absolutely is going to be no financial obligation to you. At the end of 5 years, you can say, Kiki, this has been great, but we're going to return the system. You know, we're not going to use it anymore. Hopefully you love it. I can't see why you wouldn't, because people who have it just love it. And we roll right into another 5-year renewal. And still, at that point, we're not going to ask for any money.
And Mr. Duffy, we would need commitment from the athletic directors to make sure that they are familiar with the system and that they're going to schedule all of the events, because
Yes,
if
ma'am.
it's being paid for by the community members,
Yes, ma'am.
we want to make sure that
Absolutely.
it is
We
available.
spoke on it. We had a meeting just yesterday. This is one of our topics. We're on board. Our group is on board. And one other thing I'd like to add is, in addition to, and Kiki kind of touched on this, in addition to the Carroll County Athletics that our subscribers will be able to see, we have a lot of inter-county competitions. So when our students go to Anne Arundel County, if someone can't get down there, Anne Arundel County has them in all 12 and next year 13 high schools. They've got 2 cameras in each school. They've got that opportunity. When we have competitions in Baltimore County and Montgomery County, they're still going to have those opportunities. It's not restricted just to the events taking place within Carroll County, which then, because different counties play games at different times, it may be more difficult for people to get to them. It'll open up that opportunity for people to be able to see our students.
That's a great point.
Kenny?
Is there any kind of permission given? What happens with, I've seen kids that parents say, I don't want them on the internet, I don't want their image displayed. Will that become part of when they sign up for a sport to waive that, or that hasn't been an issue anyplace?
I'm not aware of anyone now that's participating that can't, because they're in the Carroll County Times and they may be,
Oh, I know.
you know, the game of the week. So we would have to deal with it, as you just said, though. If someone did tell us that they absolutely couldn't be shown, we would have to deal with that.
And
I'm
then
not aware of anyone right now.
you're not aware of it being an
Right.
issue?
And we leave it up to the school's responsibility and how they promote it. I always think, you know, it's a great way to communicate to the community, to possibly have something up in your gym saying, you know, this is being live streamed to the NFHS network, so they're aware of it, and certainly making the community aware should you guys decide to come on board.
Commissioner Weaver mentioned editing and the 2-minute delay. What happens if a fight breaks out
Yeah,
in
that's
the
a
middle
great
of the
question.
game?
Yeah. So if a fight breaks out, there's a couple ways that you have to turn the system off. And it becomes a part of your management plan, the athletic director's management plan. One, they can go right on the app, which console, which we were talking about, is a web-based application. They can go right on there and end the stream. I don't think most athletic directors, when things are crazy in the gym, they're going to think about doing that. The other option is to call our support team and ask them to do that, which I don't think many people are going to call. And the last thing is to pull the computer out. We don't want them to, but you can just pull the plug and it will stop the stream. The good news, too, is since you own that content can come down. So you can hide it and keep it in console so it's stored so no one else has access to it to watch repeatedly over and over. And that 2-minute delay there actually helps, for sure.
And then, since we're lucky enough to have the state represented tonight, will regionals and state events be part of this? Because
Most of the state events currently are. The MPSSAA streams most state finals now on the NFHS network.
Okay.
The MPSSAA has oversight as far as broadcasting for the regional and state tournaments. So so that will continue, and I believe the subscription will be a part of that.
Correct, it would.
Okay.
Great.
And Ms. Eisenberg, I saw you reaching for the microphone. Is there?
Right, I was here with Ms. Gaddis, and we were noting that you have consent forms anyway, but it's really no different than the Baltimore Sun coming and filming. Even though a parent may not have filled out a consent form, they can film anything at any game.
Okay, so we don't really have any concerns from a legal perspective.
No, it's considered a public event, and so any public event can be filmed.
Okay.
And I would like to add to that, and I think this is, again, really important coming from education, is that let's say you have a basketball game that's being streamed to one of the school's pages. We all know that there are some high school crazies out there who just, are fixated on some of the top players across the country. No one can ever go on to that video and start to edit it themselves unless the administrator in charge gave that game film to someone. So I can watch, let's say you had the top basketball player here in the country, I can watch he or her play, but I can't grab and cut and pull content unless someone gave me access to that link. So it's a secured site, which is really important to keep in mind.
Board members, do we have any other questions?
I was interested in hearing about the, I'll call it commercialism, but when you get to the advertising, the ads and all.
Thank you for bringing that up. So 2 ways you generate revenue is through the revenue stream from the subscriptions as well as advertisement. So with the offer we are making to Carroll County, the advertisement is available right away, and the schools keep 100% of that. So for any schools that are dealing with any sponsorships, Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts, and maybe they're generating revenue from sponsorships, they would keep that, and you guys would give us a logo, and we can burn that into a stream. You might have seen it on one of the first films, so we can burn in a logo in 3 locations, the upper left and the 2 bottom corners. All we do, we don't set the parameters, we don't go out and get businesses, you simply give us the logo, and our support team will burn that logo in so that when people are watching whatever event, they're going to see a Starbucks logo or a Dunkin' Donuts or a Subway, whoever it is that you may be working with. So again, the school keeps 100% of that. You simply give us the logo and we can burn that in. We could burn in 3 logos per camera per season. So there's tons of opportunities available to generate revenue through your sponsorships.
I mean, this sounds like a fantastic opportunity, and I'm very excited about how it really expands access to the community and folks that can't, grandparents and parents who may be out of town, or that they're going to miss events. That this is really an amazing opportunity to just expand access for folks to see these events. And
that's our hope.
And I know you're going to push to get wrestling in it quickly as possible.
It's in the gymnasium. We're good.
Yes, thank you.
So I think, board members, we wanted to give you a little feel for what this could look like. Obviously, with any next steps, we would proceed and ensure that all of our required procurement guidelines are being followed, and a proper award would need to come back to the board. We just wanted to make sure that we shared the idea with you. First of all, we appreciate you being here.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Make sure you had some sense of what we were talking about, what it looked like, and kind of see some of the live stream capabilities, so that if it does come back, you know what you're looking at.
And you have my card. If anyone has questions that come up later, please feel free to call me or email me. I'd be happy to address them. Thanks for the opportunity to come here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and with that, we'll move on to item 4B, the strategic plan Pillar 1 update. Dr. Locker?
Okay, Mr. Anderson's making his way here. He's going to introduce tonight's Pillar 1 update. This is the second Pillar 1 update we've had this year, and I'll let him provide an overview and introduce the team.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Lockard. Good evening, board members, Commissioner Weaver. Earlier this academic year, you received an update on our progress working towards the priority focus areas identified in Pillar 1. Annual priority areas pertaining to elementary reading, Algebra 1 performance, CTE, AP honors participation, and MCAP results were shared and updated for this academic year. Tonight, we'd like to revisit a number of these measures and illustrate the impact they have had, not only on our local performance, but how they have influenced the CCPS Maryland State Report Card. This evening, you will receive the planned Pillar 1 January update, as well as an overview of the CCPS MSDE Report Card. The purpose for integrating these two methods of evaluation is purposeful, as there are clear relationships between our progress towards CCPS strategic plan and the system's annual performance on the MSDE Report Card. It's important that we are able to articulate and illustrate the linear relationships between meeting the performance targets within our strategic plan and that influence on the CCPS Report Card as we look to revise our local accountability measures. This evening's presentation will focus on access and credit to a well-rounded curriculum and the influence of attendance, graduation rate, proficiency levels on MCAP, and the newly implemented climate survey that provides insight not only into Pillar 1, but also 2, 3, and 4. As a reminder, the report card is comprised of many indicators that are not equally weighted. Academic achievement is 20%, academic progress is 25%, and credit to a well-rounded curriculum is 10%. And English language proficiency is 10%, which comprises about 65% of the report card. The other 35% of the report card is based on attendance and chronic absenteeism, and access to curriculum, which is about 10%. And finally, the new climate survey, which was implemented and taken into consideration this year, which is 10%. Students in grades 5 through 11 and staff members at schools participated in that survey. There's also been discussion around comparing last year's comprehensive STAR ratings to this year's STAR ratings. I want to make it clear that the STAR calculation that was completed this year is not synonymous to the calculation from last year, as there are newly introduced evaluation measures that were not calculated last year. This does not mean that this information is not valuable, but rather the comprehensive look has changed. In the spirit of collaboration, this evening you will hear from Angie McCausland, Director of Curriculum and Instruction, responsible for our instructional programming, Dr. Kendra Hart, Supervisor of School Performance, and our instructional directors, Tom Hill, Eric King, and Steve Wernick, who ultimately are responsible for supporting principals and administrative teams and utilizing these metrics of local and state to enhance student achievement. Thank you very much.
Mr. Anderson, there was a lot of information in those opening remarks.
They wouldn't let me do any of the slides, so I got it in.
So just quickly to review the 3 objectives under Pillar 1, students will exit CCPS, career, college, and community ready. Improving the proficiency level of all of our student groups in ELA and mathematics, and to provide access to a well-rounded, varied, and rigorous curriculum for all students. Data points that we'll be covering this evening, as Mr. Anderson just spoke of, access to a well-rounded curriculum, credit for a well-rounded curriculum, and under the Maryland Report Card summary, the STAR rating, attendance, and the graduation rate. I'll try to speak as quickly as Mr. Anderson. Just to review what well-rounded curriculum is, access and credit in 5th grade, access is the percentage of students enrolled in science, social studies, fine arts, PE, and health, and credit is percentage of students passing one of each of those courses. 8th grade access is percentage of students enrolled in fine arts, PE, and health. Credit is the percentage of students passing coursework in math, ELA, science, and social studies. At high school, access is defined as percentage of graduating students or students exiting high school with a certificate of program completion who meet at least one of the following criteria during high school grades 9 through 12. Enrolled in an AP, advanced placement, or international baccalaureate course, participated in dual enrollment, or enrolled in state-approved career and technical education CTE program at the CTE concentrator level or higher. Typically for CTE, the concentrator course is the 3rd course in a series of 4 courses. For completion, percentage of students who achieved any of the following: earned a score of 3 or higher on an advanced placement exam, met a standard set by the College Board on the SAT exam, met a standard set by ACT on the ACT exam, earned credit for dual enrollment, met the University of Maryland entry requirements, completed a youth or other apprenticeship training program approved by the Maryland Apprenticeship Training Council, which we're starting this year, and earned an industry certification aligned with the MSDE approved CTE program and achieved CTE concentrator level status or higher. and completed an MSDE-approved CTE program. Met standard on the ASVAB exam or received the seal of biliteracy.
So now we start to look at the data results, and now that you all fully understand that by what Ms. McCausland said, Carroll County continues to see excellent results. Our students that have access, as you can see at the high school level, it's increasing. It remains very high at the middle and elementary level. There is a slight drop at the middle school level this year because that data does fluctuate from year to year. The number of students, for whatever reason, that are not accessing the curriculum, there are individual cases and there are programmatic cases. We're working on all of those to make sure that all of our students have the opportunity. And if you look at our number of students that are actually earning credit, it went up in all 3 areas this year, so we're showing an excellent program that our students are meeting the requirements that they're being offered. So it's a really good indicator here of how successful our students are being at meeting our curriculum needs and meeting their needs for the future.
Mr. Hill, can I ask a couple of questions about this slide? So just trying to understand, some of those percentages, the percent getting credit is higher than the percent of access. I'm not understanding how that's possible.
When you look at, there's first the access, then out of the students who have access, how many of those students were meeting the requirements to get the credit?
Okay.
So that's why the numbers are different. It happens to be the same at elementary, but like, for example, at middle school, 97.2% had the access. Out of those, 98.7 were successful in meeting that criteria.
Okay. And I was reading again through the information that Ms. McCausland was saying about at the high school level. Like, even though those are fairly high numbers, like, I would expect our high school numbers to be even higher, given all of the possibilities that are provided here. And I'm trying to understand, so of the 77.6% at the high school level in 17 and 18, I mean 81.8% is an improvement, but we're still missing 18% of the kids there. What is it? What's the main driver of that 18% that's considered not having access to a well-rounded curriculum?
So if I may, to piggyback on Mr. Hill's statement, the indicators within the access are not synonymous to the indicators within credit. Okay? So to have access, you are measuring, in some cases, different indicators than you will find in the credit area. The reason your next question was in regards to 81.4% of our students receiving credit to a well-rounded curriculum, we fall, historically, that is over the last 2 years that we've looked at this, we fall right in the middle. There's lots of contributing factors to that. Oftentimes it is getting kids on the right pathway to make sure that not only are we getting them to graduation, but they are able to take, in some cases, 2 languages, that they are taking part in the SAT, that they are completing a CTE program, that they are, so there's lots of things, there's lots of pathways that we can look at, and yes, when we're looking at the opportunity for kids to have to receive credit to the well-rounded curriculum, we do have work to do. And when we break this down, which we can do at a later time, you can start to see some major disparities between our student populations. And that's one of the purposes for the Performance Academy, so that we can begin to look at pathways for kids and making sure that we're setting them up on the right track. But when you're looking at 81%, and you look at basically a year before and we're seeing improvements, our efforts are showing some fruit of our efforts. However, we're still sitting probably in the middle of the state in regards to performance there.
Okay. Well, I do know, I appreciate the comments about the 81.4% because we certainly want to improve the percent of kids getting credit for the well-rounded. But I'm also curious about the 81.8% with access. I'm trying to understand the 18% of students that we're saying don't even have access. To what is the main driver of that? Because if they're at the high schools, they have access to CTE.
Correct.
To meet graduation requirements does not, you don't meet this. You can still do, to meet Maryland standards to graduate, you can do the bare minimum and not do anything on that long list that Ms. McCausland went through. We push, we work, the counselors, the administrators work with the parents, we have scheduling evenings, to show them these things, to encourage them to go to career and tech. So, but there are still students that are, you know, they can look at you. I respect what you're saying. I just want to get a diploma. And they are not gonna, we're not gonna get credit for them accessing the well-rounded curriculum.
So we have.
But they have access to it.
Yes,
Access is a misnomer.
So that's what I'm
They're choosing not to engage.
Not to
Okay.
enroll in those courses.
Right. So that's what I thank you for saying it that way. The access is a misnomer
So-
because our students all have access to that well-rounded
It's
curriculum.
participation.
It's participation, right?
So,
Okay.
so I don't, and I also don't want to put it all on the student, right? It goes back to what we talked about in Performance Academy. This is not necessarily a cognitive issue. This is an advocacy issue. This is an issue for us to be looking at to make sure that we are challenging every single student in our school system to make sure that we put them on a pathway to receive credit to a well-rounded curriculum. Because it is possible and they are capable.
How many middle school students are there? This is less than 2% drop. How many students is that?
You're talking about approximately 5,800 students this year.
Okay. So 100 kids, maybe.
Right.
The next piece is the four-year adjusted cohort graduation, and the graduation rate indicator measures the performance of students in a school who graduates with a regular high school diploma. This indicator measures a cohort of ninth graders who graduate within 4 or 5 years. And just to let you know, adjustments are made for students that transfer in or out. You'll see, and I want to highlight just 3 different areas where you see Black or African American. You see that there is a drop. You also see an increase in the Hispanic population, and you also see a drop in the 2 or more races area. And we just want to make a note of that there are differences in the subgroups because lately, more recently rather, the State Department of Education made some adjustments of how they document student races. And one example that I'll give you is that before we had particular codes that we used. And based on those codes, we could put students in different categories or different race blocks. And so if now it has changed where if you're Hispanic and with any other race, you're automatically counted as Hispanic. And we have Ms. Pamela Mester here who can tell you that our Hispanic population is one of our fastest growing populations. And so no matter what other races you are, you no longer go into the 2 or more races. You now just automatically stay in Hispanic race. And so with that being said, we've seen some adjustments and we've seen some differences in some of our numbers. A group of us, including Mrs. McCausland, all of our school directors, Mr. Anderson, and I work with Colleen Enzer, who's back here with me also today. We've been looking at the numbers with Jen Seashaw, who was in our tech services department, just to see where those adjustments are actually taking place. And so recently, Mrs. Seashaw had to make some adjustments in our system to match the coding that the Maryland State Department of Education is using. And so with that, we've seen some adjustments and some ups and increases and declines in some of our areas as far as our races. So hopefully by the time we come back to you all again, that part will be solidified and we will know who had any types of changes and where do we go from there as far as helping our students and where they need to be in reference to our graduation rates.
And who makes the decisions as far as which category you're putting them in?
It's based on the coding that the state provides.
Right, MSDE.
So MSDE. Before we had different codes and we knew that those particular numbers identified with a certain race. Now if you have Hispanic along with any of those codes, that's an automatic Hispanic subgroup. And then the others, if you have multiple races, you automatically go into the 2 or more races category.
And Dr. Hart, that is determined by the enrollment of the family, right, when they enroll their student?
Yes, so when a student, thank you for that, and when anytime a parent comes to enroll a student, they have a right to determine what race their student is.
Well, that's what I thought.
Yes.
But then when you said it's all based on the state, I didn't know whether we were going in and changing codes.
No, so
or
based
not.
on if they check off different races on their registration application, we put it into the system, and then according to how the state reads that, the students are put into the category. But yes, ultimately, a parent makes the decision.
I thought, and it's interesting, so that's just reclassification. 2 or more races, and I remember that from last year, was the best achieving group. Now it's the worst. And so it's because kids have been pulled out of that group.
Different classification.
Wow.
All right. Our attendance continues overall to be very good. All three levels are within 1 percentage point, 95%. But I will say the challenge that we face, and you'll see that it works into the Maryland report card, is chronic absenteeism. Every school has a GAPS team, a team that addresses that. Our PPWs, our student service are working actively. We have a truancy diversion panel. Some of the things that countywide we're doing to continually address students who are chronically absent is an ongoing piece. You might look at this data and say, oh, it's good. Well, there are individual students who require a great deal of our time because it's very hard for a student to improve if they're not attending school. And we've shown some real growth in some of those areas. The Spanish Latin American population and the attendance work that's being done, for example, at West Middle has shown some real positive immediate impacts on attendance for kids who were chronically disengaged with school. So there are a lot of very positive things happening in this area.
Has our high school percentage dropped?
That, Mr. King, I'll defer to you.
If it did, maybe, I think
Not
it was
much.
right around 95%.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been in that neighborhood for many, many years.
It looks like about 1% or
Yeah.
drop
seems like
over
it's-
from a few years ago.
So Mr. Anderson mentioned that we have many indicators on our Maryland report card, and there's a snapshot of our elementary schools. And you'll see across the top, the first category, you can get up to 65%, and we look at it as 65 points. And then the second section is the 35 points. And so out of those points that you could possibly earn, they started with the academic achievement piece, and that's performance for English, language, arts, and math. And out of the 20 points for elementary schools, we have 12.9 points out of the 20 points, which is equivalent to the 64.4 that you see at the bottom, and that is consistent from last year, so there were no changes in that area. And for the academic progress, there's a 25-point possibility and a 10-point possibility, which equals 35 points, possible points, and we earned 21.5 of those possible points, which is equivalent to 61.4%, and that is a decrease by 6%, or 6 points. And then the English proficiency language is progress in achieving English language proficiency, which is measured by the MCAT. And out of those 10 points, elementary schools earned 7.6 of those points, which is equivalent to 75.9. And if you add those together, that gives you, once you put those scores together, you'll get our total score, and I'll tell you that in a moment. I'm sorry, I jumped ahead of myself. Out of the 35 points, which is part of the school quality and school success, you could possibly get 35 points, and we have 28.9 of those points, which is equivalent to 82.8%. And so when you add all of that together, we had a total score of 70.9 out of 100 possible points.
And it's interesting to note in Mr. Anderson's opening comments when he said that, you know, one of the things that jumped out at me when he said academic achievement is only worth 20% of the overall score. I'm like, wait, what? You know, like that's really what we're all about. But it's just the way that this is broken down. I mean, there really are other pieces of academic achievement. It's just it's looking more at academic progress, right, for those folks who aren't necessarily...
Yeah, so you have two different sections there, right? You have your achievement, which is directly related to your MCAP results, right? And then you have your progress piece in there, which is 20% of it is basically how we're improving. And oftentimes you've heard it's very hard to stay at the top, right? You come out and you do well, and so we're looking for improvement each and every year. And so that's one of the obstacles, not that that's an excuse. We should continue to always progress. The other piece is the 10% for credit for completion. This year that MISA score is in there also, which is I think about 5 points falls within there and 3 points. I think Ms. McCullough has provided that information to me. We can get that, but that's also included this year as well.
It's a science assessment that was not a part of, as Jason said, there's a lot of different things in this year's report card that were not in last year's. So now we're calculating in a science
That's correct.
assessment as well as the survey.
The climate
as well as
survey was
growth.
not included last year in the
Wasn't
percentage.
a piece of that last year either.
Right.
But within our local strategic plan, I mean, we've got some of these other elements built in, but we're really focusing on that first column, right, within the measures that we've put into our local strategic plan, so.
So yes and so no, right? So when we looked at revision of the strategic plan, we knew that ESSA indicated that we needed to cut in half the percentage of students that were not proficient by 2030. And so when we set out our goals, they were very ambitious. So we are looking for progress as well. So there is linear relationships there, too, or in our expectations, rather. There are relationships there, too.
Right.
And Mrs. Savigny, if it helps, we also have the performance indicators and what they each mean, so we'll be more than glad to share that information with the entire board if you want that information also.
And quickly, to go over middle schools, you're seeing a similar pattern. Our performance is very consistent from last year. There is a drop in the academic progress. That's our growth rate, and we continue to work on that. The English language proficiency is showing a very positive gain. The Performance Academy, the work that we're doing with the TSI grant and at West Middle is a real good model for us to look for future performance at all schools. So that's showing immediately a positive growth, which I think is a very good thing. Probably the newest thing, the 35%, are the survey results. I know that I've been meeting with principals. We meet tomorrow. All of them are going over and looking and diving into their data. This is good beginning benchmark data, but the difficulty is it brings more questions than it does answers initially. But we continue to use it. I love that we have new criteria and a new way to look at middle school because it opens up new conversations for us to better serve our kids. But it's a very similar pattern that we see at elementary and middle.
Do you have those earned points for middle school as well, or?
Yes, I do.
We do.
Actually, we do.
Okay.
You want to read them?
Yeah, academic achievement, it's 12.6. Academic progress was 19.4. 5.9 in English language proficiency, and 26.2 in the school quality and student success.
Okay.
And Mr. Hill, I appreciate those comments as well. I think I would really like to have a work session separately on some of these topics because there's a lot going on here. There's a lot of information that I'd really like to delve into. And specifically with tying it to our local strategic plan as well, right? Like we know that a couple of years ago we had a big issue with the middle school ELA results, and when we really dug into that data and shined a spotlight on it and realized that, you know, there were issues with the writing component, and we made significant strides, right, on the academic achievement for middle school ELA. So I think if we can take the time and put that kind of focus on like identifying more specifically the things that we want to target going forward.
And to tell you, that's happening right now. Every school that I go to is showing me where they've dug in, drilled into their data with what they can do with it, and their plan and how they're moving forward. So, you know, I'd love to have a work session to do that because we can share the work and show you where it's going. Because when we dive into something in Carroll County, and I've been around long enough to watch us do this, we show improvement, and we do have positive results. So that's where we're starting. That's certainly not where we're going to end.
Right, and absolutely. I know there is a lot of work going on and a lot of focus on this with the SIT teams and the performance academies, and I know that there's a lot going on, but I'd like to have a work session just for an educational purposes and to make sure that we are shining the spotlight on the things that need to be happening.
What I really appreciate is it helps the board to make sure that the resources that are coming to the schools are aligned to what we're doing to improve success. So.
Right. And that's why we
our
brought,
team works together.
You heard Mr. Anderson mention about formative assessment practices in Carroll County Public Schools, local assessment practice, as well as some of the tools that we've been unveiling as it relates to sort of mining and culling a lot of the data that's available to us to be able to make those improvements. I think
And again, I know those discussions are really rich in the schools as far as looking at the data and having teams discuss, well, why is it looking this way? You know, what are some of the trends we're seeing and what are some possible causes, and therefore, what can we do differently?
It's very exciting to watch them work. The way they do it and the way it produces results for kids is what I think we're supposed to be about.
Can I also add that we have the Performance Matters data dashboard, and recently I've had the pleasure of working with Mr. Jeffrey Alasakis, and we've trained over 400, close to 400 administrators, teachers, team leaders, different people throughout the school systems, our guidance counselors, and now the data is right at your fingertips, and people have been amazed with the access that they have of the current data that we have to make instructional decisions for students. So this all helps us when we start talking about students, where they are and where they need to be. So we're really excited about the Performance Matters and the data dashboard. And then just this past, when we returned from our winter break for our 2 days, Mrs. McCausland had us involved in another piece of data dashboard where you can actually make the assessments. And so the assessments helps us with the analytics piece of it. And so teachers can start to look at the assessments that we put in the system. Also, they can create assessments themselves and get the results right away and be able to analyze that data and make future instructional decisions. So we're excited about all of that, because then that helps us overall as a county as far as the decisions that we make for students.
And it's important that we know that, again, at the schools, you all really are turning the numbers into names and making some good decisions.
The great point is we used to spend time developing the spreadsheets and the reports with Performance Academy, with Performance Matters now. Instead of doing that, we can actually use the results and make decisions and work with kids, and that's really where the rubber hits the road, is those decisions impact kids, kids impact the success.
And
I do have a question and statement. Number one, that data's, that's a really big thing, and you're diving into that, and you're going to get some answers of where we got to go. The thing that bothers me is that climate survey. That is out there. If a teacher had a bad day, if a student had a bad day, if a student's mad at a teacher, you know, it's just too many variables. Are they going to try to improve that? That it's just, it's subjective. And that's a lot of points.
It is. It definitely has a...
And that's one of my big concerns. Look, the other stuff, we're diving into the data, and you're digging in, and we're fixing and all that. But that climate survey bothers me.
Yeah, it can be pretty subjective, right? And so it can be based on how the student or the staff member's feeling at that time. It could be that they have new administration and they're not too keen on the new philosophy, right? It could be the following. And so really this is the first time in a long time that I know that at the state level that we're interested in the voice of our employees as well as our students. And it does influence the score, unfortunately, and it maybe one could argue that it's unfairly influenced. However, I do think it does help us begin to focus on the climate and the environment of our schools. And I do think it helps us now take this information and say, hey, listen, this is what your kids are saying about your school.
Right.
And really gets into multiple areas. I know substance abuse has been a real topic that folks really want to get into. And you can see the areas up there in regards to safety, environment, community, and relationships. One of the pieces, not only are we looking at the individual student's perception, but also the staff member's perception, and then looking at what are the disparities between the two. You know what I mean? I think that's important. Do the students see the school as the staff member does? You know, and as Tom had said earlier, it's a start, right? It's the first time we've asked kids what they thought about this. And as the comments were made earlier this evening, you know, that's who we're serving. So I do think it's important for us to know what folks are thinking. But yeah, and that may be why it is only 10 points, but it does influence that school quality piece.
And I understand. And yes, you need to work together, and we are there for our students. But it's just been very subjective, and it just, you know, it's very concerning. But as long as we can use the data and turn it around, that's a good thing. Yeah. But it's 10%.
And it's baseline this year, and as Tom said also, this is a great starting point. I know all the directors, Steve as well as Eric, have said the same thing in our meetings.
And it really is critical information that isn't captured in any other way.
And then also, and I was wondering, and like you say, this tied in great to what Gary said earlier on the students, and it's subjective, but it's given us some good information. And you guys all mentioned that 35%, some of the other stuff that changed for this year. Do we know what's going to change for next year, and can we be proactive to that, and could that maybe be part of a work session? I think that would be Not that we were ambushed by this, I'm not saying that, but can we be proactive on that, and do we know what's changing? And maybe you already said it and talked so fast I didn't hear it.
There's a social studies assessment next year.
Supposed to be 10 minutes.
Right?
So I'm teasing. So yeah, so there's going to be new academic measures,
Social
studies in place. And I'll be quite honest with you, I think that, it took a while to deliver the survey from the state. We were promised certain dates, and they just didn't get to it, and now they have gotten to it. And so I know that next week I'll be going to the Associate Superintendent meeting that Ms. McCabe and I split. We take turns, and a large portion of the agenda is looking at the survey and looking at, listen, is this the right approach? Is this telling us what we want? Is this worth it? Because also you have to look at the affect of the student when they take it, because we've talked about it with the instructional directors. It was a compliance measure in many cases, and these kids were just going through it quick. I understand your question of, can we be more proactive in planning in regards to what we know is coming? But for the most part, there's going to be, I think, minor integrated pieces moving forward. But I think finally we have the 100 points sitting in front of you now. What that entails may adjust a bit.
So no new subjective kind of things that you're aware of?
I hope not, sir. Yeah, I hope not.
Good answer.
Yeah.
And being a teacher, I know that if it counts in some way, I think they take their time and are more thoughtful. But they can just put anything they want on that survey. That's just what really concerns me. And I know there's very useful things, but I just know if it's not an accountable thing and it's not a requirement for graduation, you can just put any kind of stuff down. So that's all I'm just concerned about. And I don't know what the results are, but I just think it maybe needs to be thought through a little bit more on that survey part.
I appreciate you saying it, because I think everyone's working really hard in schools. And that piece is really dinging some schools, unfortunately, as we look around.
Yes.
We got to look at it and hopefully move from here up now.
Okay, thanks.
If you don't mind, if I can add that Colleen Enzer and myself met with the directors of the different grade bands, and we discussed the exact same things that you've brought up to us also. And we've talked about the discrepancy based on the grade band or the grade level of the student. A fifth grade student may look at bullying or substance abuse differently than maybe what a high school will look at that information. And so I had the email in front of me just so I can have this reminder. We started asking questions just even about the results and the questions. And one of the questions we had, which many other people have had as well, is how do you get some of the scores? Because just on the spectrum of receiving a 1, same thing on the spectrum of receiving a 10. If you have 400 people filling out a survey, unless everybody puts a 10 down, how do you get a 10 in that area? And the same thing with 1, and then the rest can be part of an average. And just to piggyback on what Mr. Anderson just said, we've asked so many questions that our last response from MSDE that I forwarded to Dr. Lockhart was that they are working on appropriate messages to local school systems in understanding the results of the survey, and that this topic of discussion will be held at the next upcoming Assistant Superintendent's meeting. So just so you'll know that they're working through it as well, and you have a lot of people in systems that have questions as well.
Okay, thank you. Just concerned.
Okay, at the high school level, very quickly, academic achievement, we scored 21.6 points. Graduation rate, 14.4 points. English language proficiency, 6.3 points. Readiness for post-secondary success, 8.1 points. And for the school quality student success, 23.1 points.
And then we get to the Maryland Report Card summary. And then again, according to MSDE, Maryland Report Card ratings can be used to highlight strengths and identify areas which need improvement and ultimately develop a plan for improvement. And as I shared earlier, we've been discussing with our directors of the different grade bands what's our next steps. And as we talk about developing a plan of improvement or suggestions for developing plans for improvement using data, the directors have been having these conversations with their building level principals as well. And so the breakdown summary is 5 stars. In order to receive 5 stars, schools had to have at least 75 of the total points earned. In order to receive 4 stars, you needed at least 60, but less than 75. 3 stars, at least 45 points, but less than 60. And 2 stars, at least 30, but less than 45. And then one, you had to have less than 30 points. And you're probably saying, what does all that mean? And so it's back to when we start talking about the points that you earned in the ratings and the different indicators, that's how you determine your areas. And I know Mrs. Herbert sent me a note about this right away, that we had a school that was not rated, and that was Pars Ridge Elementary School. First of all, some of the pieces were 5th grades on up, and then it also included insufficient data. They didn't have enough data, which, of course, if you're not a 5th grader and Pars only goes up to 2nd grade, we did not have sufficient data, and so they are the school that's not rated. We have seen from last year to this year some changes in the elementary school. We had 11 4 stars and 10 5 stars. We had 48% 5 stars last year, and that has changed this year, as you see, to the 19%. And I know that Mr. Warnick has talked to his principals about that, and they're diving into that data to figure out what took place and what's different in their schools. At the middle school, we have 5 4 stars and 1 5 star at 13%. Last year, we had 5 4 stars and 3 5 stars, which was 38%. And at the high school, we have 3 schools with 4 stars and 4 schools with 5 stars. Last year, we had 3 schools with 4 stars and 4 schools with 5 stars, and it stayed the same at the 57%.
And the point I say about that subjective part, I know we had 2 middle schools right on the cusp, and I want them to
Ms.
be...
Hart missed that point, which I really appreciated, but...
yeah.
But the reality is they're very close. They are. Your point is well taken. They're on the boundary, and we're looking at how the new information impacted their score.
Yes.
But it never changes the process that we're going to work to improve the school. And this is more information than we had before. And it really hones us in on some issues that are showing up in that survey so that we can address it. So I never view the data as a positive or a negative. It's information we can use. And the good part about this is it's new and more information that we can use now.
Right, we don't really want any of our schools to be 3-star, so if they are close, it's new data points that we can say, okay, how do we get them over the hump again?
And both of those schools are presently planning. We had some 5 stars that are now 4. I can tell you that they called me immediately, and they're looking for those answers and working to improve. But remember, this is a new way of looking at it. This is a whole new set of criteria that we're using. What we want to do is take this baseline and improve on it.
Mm-hmm. And that's why I think it would be really helpful to have that work session, just more as an education for us, to the exact point that you made, to make sure that we understand that the resources are being used appropriately. Right, I mean, it's a tie to the budget process and our strategic plan initiatives in terms of, you know, the one piece that we're not asking for this year is the academic specialists, right? And it's not because, and it's partially because there's a lot of other things going on behind the scenes. We're completely reevaluating our interventions, and you know, in light of all of this data. But there's a lot going on, and I don't want people to think that, well, we're just ignoring that piece right now, because there's a lot of activity. So I think to have that session and have understand what we're doing and what we're looking at and all this additional data and how it all comes into play, I think would be very helpful.
We also want to add that we're excited, but because there are many conversations across departments and across grade levels, and we've seen an increase in that part. And I cannot go without adding that Mrs. McCabe has been a big part of these conversations as well. But we have just seen an increase in how we have our conversations, our next steps, and more collaborative efforts in what we're going to do next, because we see them as our students, not, you know, you have middle school or you have the high school. Now it's, these are our students. What are we going to do so that at each grade band we have success? Right. So we're really excited about that part.
That's great.
Which leads us into our next step slide. And we celebrate the gains that we continue to make as a school system, but we also recognize that gaps exist, and we need to close those gaps, and we need to work together collaboratively to do that. I know with the performance academies, as an example, that's a great way to bring all of us together to collaborate, look at the data. What does that data mean for my school? What does it mean for the individual students at this school? And how do we get to the next step? How do we improve not only their academic achievement, but their overall experience within the school building?
And this part about what does it mean for schools, this is the school improvement process, the academic achievement that we always follow. We're going to take the data, we're going to analyze it, we're going to find strengths and needs. We're going to develop plans for those. The real important part is then to reevaluate and reexamine and revisit those so that you continue to improve. There's nothing new in there. This is the process that we use. This has shown success in this county for years, and we're going to continue to, like Dr. Hart said, collaborate and work with everybody. I mean, one of the things that's really exciting for me is that supervisors and principals are working in subgroups to develop benchmark assessments for middle schools that I've been desperately wanting for years. It's actually happening now, and it's happening with a collaborative model that's bringing about, the last meeting I was blown away at how far they've moved so quickly. So we'll have a better way to use that formative information to analyze our schools and look at ways that we can better serve them that we've never had before. So this piece of the slide is really actively happening right now.
Right, there's a lot, I mean, there's a lot going on behind all this. One of the things that I was thinking too that might be advantageous for us, you know, the most important work in this system happens in our classrooms and in our schools. So for a future work session, I think it would be helpful for us to have that perspective join us at the table. So we'll solicit some of our principals, some of our teachers who are part of that school improvement planning process. I think that'd be helpful as well.
So on different levels, or?
Yes.
Yeah.
We've asked them.
Yeah,
we hitch up along the way.
We do it as we go.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you all very
Thank you so much. Okay, so next up is Section 5 on the reports. So we have the construction report.
So
Dr. Lockard.
Yep, board members, this is our standard monthly construction report. I will say with the holiday break and the limited time we've had since the last meeting, there are no major updates involved. However, there is Mr. Marks in case you had any questions.
Happy New Year.
Same to you.
Happy New Year.
I don't have a question for you.
I had a couple of questions. Okay, I'm looking at on page 3 at the Westminster East Middle School replacement. I'm just wondering if there's an update on the historical trust, if there's any information.
No update as of
Okay.
as of right now.
Okay, and then I noticed, and again, I think your explanations at the bottom for Spring Garden Elementary's HVACs and then for Westminster High's, again, I see that those dates have just been adjusted back. by
Correct.
the year.
And Mr. O'Neill will update you with further details on that when you go through the operating and CIP discussion later.
Okay.
I could update you on one item for Westminster High School. Mr. Prokop wanted me to mention that for the facade.
No.
I was briefed with staff this week on where we are and where we're going, and we're going to address the critical needs first, okay, that need to happen. So they're going to present, you know, a change order that's going to take care of the engineers, as you know, assertions that need to happen now, and then a bigger plan that we're going to look at, possibly getting into the capital improvement plan for the items that aren't of critical need right now. So,
Well, I am going to ask a question then. Is the whole school going to have to be redone?
as of right now, we won't know until this report's done. We've asked the engineer to compile that report, and we might be doing some more testing involved in that, and then we'll find out. As of right now, I don't foresee that, but that's just my casual glance from what I've seen done so far. They've done a great job in the maintenance department of managing this and taking care of the needs that we see in a test that need to be addressed right now. So,
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim.
I do have a real quick question regarding Career and Technology Center. Were they having any more meetings like they were with regarding the planning? Was any of those meetings coming up soon, or?
for the planning committee,
Mhm.
or okay, I'm sure we will address this. We're going into our CD documents now. Usually, Mr. Kane will put out a document back to the planning committee to say these are the results of where we are. I don't know that anything's been scheduled yet, but as the architect is feverishly making all the final preps on the designs to bring them for you for approval soon, so.
Okay, wonderful. Ken and I just wanted to just follow up on that.
Yeah.
We haven't heard anything, so we
Yes.
just wanted to kind of follow up and see what's going on.
And we totally understand.
Thank you.
Okay, and I did have a question as well about that minority business enterprise outreach. You're saying the purpose was to introduce them to prime contractors?
Yes. So what happens with that outreach event is we have the Maryland Department of Transportation there. We have our construction manager. It's basically an open invite to MBE and WBE contractors across the state to come and hear about the project. And a lot of times, an MBE or WBE contractor may not be the whole part of a subcontracted scope. They might be a part of that scope. So if they do something for, say, a door assembly that they concentrate in as a company, they might be talking to a larger contractor that has a bigger part of that scope. So what they do at that event is they actually ask people there, who are you with and what do you like to do? And they actually openly discuss, you need to talk to this person or that person to help them out. So it's a very positive event for all players.
I did have a couple of quick questions about the 75% CIP, but I think that's probably better answered as part of our budget discussion later. Would you agree with that? Okay, because it's not necessarily project specific, but more conceptual. Okay, great. Board members, any other questions on the construction report? Okay, thank you, Mr.
Thank
Marks.
you.
Okay, so we'll move on to the 2019-2020 enrollment projections report. Dr. Locker.
Okay. Board members, for the past several years, we've produced the Enrollment Projections Report in January, preceding the Educational Facilities Master Plan, EFMP, release in May of each year. As you know, ultimately these data are included in the EFMP and considered as we look at facilities and utilization needs based on relevant board policies. Our enrollment projections are also submitted to the State Department of Planning for their review and acceptance as well. So I'm pleased to announce that we are continuing to grow as a system, even if not at historic rates. We are experiencing some growth. In the past few years, we've asked our facilities planner, Mr. Kane, to provide a detailed update on the background and underlying formula that goes into our enrollment projections. We think at this point, having that background information very well established for this year's report, we were asking Mr. Kane to provide some of the highlights or major takeaways from the latest report. So he'll be here to touch on those for you, and then certainly we know you have access to all the information for questions and conversation. Mr. Kane.
So I think it was my 45-slide presentation last year that made the decision that it's probably been covered enough. I did want to give a few highlights on this year's projections. The total enrollment did increase by 166 students from last year's actual enrollment to the current total for September 30th was 25,345 students. That is 177 more students than last year's projected 2019 enrollment. The bulk of the difference or the change from last year's projections, why we're higher, is the actual kindergarten enrollment. We did experience, we actually enrolled 137 more kindergarten students than projected. And the reason for that is actual kindergarten enrollments were 250 students higher than the actual birth totals. So although in last year's projections we were assuming that we would see some growth from birth to kindergarten, the amount of growth that we experienced this year was higher than expected. So, and that was higher by 137. So that was, news, I guess. And a large driver of that is what that means is that there's more folks moving into the county. Obviously, if we're seeing more kindergartners than we had babies born by Carroll residents 5 years ago, they're coming from somewhere, and that means they're having their children and moving into the county after the birth occurs. So, that's a big reason we're seeing that that trend lately. Compared to last year's projections, overall, long-term, these projections show us approximately 1,500 students higher long-range than last year's projections. And I compared the 2028 enrollment from last year, which would have been the 10-year projection last year, with this year's projections, and it's approximately 1,500 students higher. The bulk of the reason for that is higher kindergarten, actual higher kindergarten enrollments and projected kindergarten enrollments. So that's kind of the bulk of the, I would say 50 to 60% of it is that kindergarten number, and then the remaining difference is the higher survival ratios from grade to grade. So from first to second, we're seeing more second graders than were enrolled last year in first grade. So again, that's really the result of that folks moving into the county with children, you know, in the middle of their children going to school. So they'd be at first grade in another county, and they move here, and then we'd see them in second grade. So that's kind of just an overall quick snapshot. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Board members?
I think we really need to look at some of these areas that are seeing a massive influx. We need to take a look. I know Runnymede is, particularly for me, I look at Runnymede, and that's a huge problem. We have a big development going in Tawnytown, but none of those kids are going to Runnymede. They're going to they're all going to Runnymede. They're not going to Tawnytown Elementary School. So we need to really look at certain areas that are having this large influx. I mean, I went back to 2015 to what the projected for this year for Runnymede, and it was only 79%. But now we are sitting at 91. I mean, that's a huge difference.
So these projections will be utilized for the upcoming 10-year facility master plan that's developed over the coming months. That'll be brought back in May to the board. Part of the annual process is to look at the new information, the new projections, and look at areas where there's concerns and you know, if there's capacity needs. You know, I'm not sure that there'll be necessarily capacity projects resulting from these, but there could be recommendations similar to last year for a look at redistricting in certain areas or things like that.
Yeah.
But that's typically done as part of the facility master plan process.
Correct. Just one more thought on Runnymede as a single school. And I just looked at Cindy to try to make sure this number's still accurate. It's been a while since I looked at it, but after the school closures, there were the Board of Ed at that time made a decision to grandfather any incumbent student, and as we understood their action at the time, siblings as well. Mm-hmm. And at one time there were about 90 kids out of district at Runnymede, so that's, you know, that's causing some different interesting scenarios. We had at the last joint meeting, one of the commissioners expressed some concerns about the parent drop-off loop.
Right.
That's a byproduct of that. So there's a decent number of students at Runnymede, and we'll have to get a more accurate number by the time we get back to the May-June facility master plan, who are not districted there by location, but rather grandfathered there as a result of the school closure decision.
Because I looked at the boundary line where the new development is, Meads Crossing. I mean, that's not even a mile away from Tawnytown Elementary School.
Right.
And that's all going to Runnymede. I mean, that's...
Yeah, but...
I mean, that's a big development going in that's
Sure.
all going into Runnymede.
And that's something certainly you can look at and then have us look at through the master plan. But there is a group of roughly 90 kids who eventually will not be in that mix as they phase
Right.
out. So that'll sort of bring some things back into focus too, in a different way.
I just think we need to be really careful too, because, I mean, I'll be honest, when I first saw this, and being who I am and where my background is, I focus on the areas that were affected by closures. And I'm looking at it, I'm going, these numbers are insane. Like that, it's scary how fast we were told one, you know, communities were told one thing, and now this is something different. And I think that's something we have to really look at and make sure that we're not impacting students and their education by having larger classroom sizes, because that's something we really don't, I don't want to do.
Well, and if it's the will of the board, that's not something, looking at the grandfathering issue relative to those numbers, because that's why you would see that spike right away at Runnymede in that 1 year, that those kids who were suddenly there. That's not something that Bill considers. Once they're in the school, then they're in the algorithm, but if that is something you want us to tease out to see how many grandfathered students there are in different places, we could do that as an additional component to, you know, to when we update for the master plan. It wouldn't be in the master plan, but we could do our best to say, here's some of the elementary numbers or different numbers on kids who are out of district because of the grandfathering decision.
Well, I think if we go to Mr. Kane's point about this being, this is the first set of numbers that goes into our planning tool, right? So, I mean, this is what leads into the EFMP, which then leads into the CIP, right? I mean, so this is really intended to be used as a planning tool, right? So we look at the projections, and one of the things that struck me, similar to some of Ms. Battaglia's comments, and Bill, you said you looked at the 2028 projections and compared them to the past. I was kind of looking at the 5-year. I pulled out the reports from the last couple of years and was looking at the change in the 2024 projections, because that's 5 years from now, right, on the actuals, and looking back at what 2024 looked like in prior years. And one of the things that I noticed was that there's an 800 kid difference at the elementary level in 2024 this year than there was last year, which is it's a big jump in that number in 1 year. I mean, 800 kids is 1.5 elementary schools, right? So I was saying, okay, well, that's going to drive this as a planning tool. That's driving up those numbers in 2024, and those utilization numbers. We're going to have to think about what's going on or what we need to do in those particular elementary schools. But when I took a step back, I realized that the birth to kindergarten ratio is what's driving a lot of those numbers, right? So the fact that we're using 109% as our 10-year projection for that birth to kindergarten ratio.
Correct.
I'm a little concerned about that number. So using the 109.87%, that's a 4-year average, right?
That is the 4-year average, correct.
Right, but we're using that as a point of reference for a 10-year projection. And if you look back at the last 20 years of experience, there were only 3 times that we exceeded that number of 109.87. So I'm a little concerned that this is a very high assumption, in my opinion, and it's kind of driving those growth percentages 5 years out, saying, okay, from a planning perspective, we need to start looking at these, and I'm not sure that it's giving us the right message. So what I feel like is that we need to do some sensitivity testing on that number, right? Like, so if 109.87, that's driving up those numbers in the out years of projections. But if we used a 10-year average on the number, like the 102.78, what does that make the numbers look like differently 5 years out, right? And I think if we sensitivity test that, so we can kind of bookend it and say, okay, this is a worst case scenario and this is a high side scenario, and this might be our best estimate.
And just so you know, last year's projections were based on a 107, projecting out 107%.
Right.
So, it is a little bit higher than last year. The other big change besides that driving it is we had, again, additional kindergartners actually enrolled this year higher than expected. And then the 2018 births, actual birth data, we were projecting 1,620. We saw 1,734, which was 140 higher than the 2017, and significantly higher than we projected, which then raises the base for the out-year birth projections, which then also applied with the 2% increase to the birth to kindergarten ratio is going to compound that. But correct, that's one of the assumptions that you certainly can choose that could move the needle one way or the other We could use a 10-year average, we could use a 6-year average, we could use a 7-year, we could use any number of averages. We used the 4-year average more so to take out the kind of the recession era influence on the numbers, because those we actually were losing. We were losing kindergartners. We were seeing less kindergartners than we actually had kids born in the county, so people were moving out of the county. The 10-year average grabs a chunk of those years. The 4-year average leaves those out. But again, it does raise that higher than if you did the 10-year average. But we certainly can run the numbers based on changing that assumption, and it would have a different, projections would look different for schools and overall.
Right. Because, I mean, if you think about the situation that we're looking at with Freedom right now, right, if you look at the elementary school projections, we consider elementary schools to be approaching inadequate if they're at 105%, correct? So
Up to 104, by board policy, it's up to 105% is approaching. Over 105 is inadequate.
Is inadequate, right. And so if you look at the elementary school projections, the school that we have the only elementary school that we have an issue with right now is Freedom from from an inadequate space perspective, right? And so we're already addressing that. But using this as a planning tool, you look the 5 years out, you look in 2024, there are several more schools that cross that threshold that we would need to be looking at. But I think a lot of that is being driven by that birth to kindergarten ratio. I'd like to try to understand. So using 109% to do that projection is what's, I believe, might be what's driving those 2024 numbers to be high for some of those schools.
A lot of the schools that are like Carroll Town, for example, a large part of it is they had a lot more kids show up in their school this year than were projected to. And once they show up, they're now built into that projection for the next 6 years or 5 years. Right. They're kindergarten now, but they'll be there for another 5 years. So if they're 30 kids over what we expected, or 20 kids over, it can really jump them up quickly unless the next kindergarten is much lower than expected. But if you have, I guess the question would be if there are specific schools that are concerns, we can certainly look to run it and look at the impact of changing it. I guess some of the assumptions, doing it, throughout the document, then there's potentially a whole other set of document. We certainly can do different scenarios. I guess at the board's, I guess, direction. There are 1,000 ways to do this.
I'm sure.
So
right.
And they will all probably not be. I mean, Dr. Ecker always said that one thing we know is they're always wrong. If they're exactly right, it's probably luck. But these are generally accurate projections within a % of range. But yeah, I don't know that we'll ever get to a point where everyone will be exactly on the number. So it's a matter of how accurate everyone's comfortable with. So.
Right, no, and I appreciate those comments because I deal with financial projections all the time. I understand if they were right on, it means that it was dumb luck a lot of times in those projections. But I mean, in the spirit of trying to use this as a planning tool, right? I mean, as part of the CIP, we're determining the capital projects that we need to be doing several years out. What this is saying to me is that, okay, Freedom is on, from an action plan perspective, what do we need to action? We know that we have an issue at Freedom, right? And that we're talking about potential redistricting options, right? What these projections also say to me is that, okay, well, Carroll Town is also potentially of concern in the projections. That's a contiguous school to Freedom, so they probably need to be included in the discussions moving forward, right? Because they cross over the 105% in just 2 years, right? So that seems to be another actionable item that we need to be concerned with. But when I look 5 years out, I say, well, there's a couple of more schools that actually cross over that 105% range that we may need to start thinking about. But that's where I really want to get maybe 1 or 2 more sensitivity tests on that birth to kindergarten ratio, because if we are overstating that, and like I said, the 109% is higher than anything we've experienced over 20 years except for 3 separate years, right? I want to understand how much impact that assumption has on the model. Like, do suddenly at 5 years out, do those schools don't really look like a concern anymore?
Right, yeah.
If that makes sense. Just in the spirit of using this as a planning tool, I think having that sensitivity testing would be helpful.
And I think in kind of the opposite of that, if they are real, we don't want to make decisions with Freedom and Carrolltown that in 3 years we look like, well, you shouldn't have done that, you know, now that school's a problem. So, yeah, I think it's very critical if, and I know it's a guess, but how accurate is this? And if it is accurate, that's going to affect their decision on Freedom now. And if it's not, maybe also, but it's critical.
Are any of our schools closed schools?
Schools that would be over, I believe it's 97%. The student services would be they would be the ones to determine that using these numbers, but so if a school's over 97%, I believe it becomes closed.
Are you asking currently?
Yeah, currently.
I don't remember them off the top of my head. We do have, I think, 5 schools are closed, I think.
Yeah, Freedom definitely has. And I think Sykesville one.
3 that I know of.
Yeah.
No, I think we added.
Manval.
I think, I don't remember this off the top of my head. I can certainly get it, but Man Valley is closed. East Middle is closed. I'm going to do this off the top of my head. It's scary.
Freedom.
Freedom is closed. I believe Carrolltown became closed. It didn't start as closed, but became closed because of the influx of not just kindergartners, but other enrollment. But 97% is our threshold. So, and we'll talk about that in a little while, about a lottery, so just to pique your curiosity. But we are going to, we publish that with our out-of-district information, which schools are closed. And I don't recall if there's any other, Manchester Valley High School, right? I think those are only closed schools at this time.
So once they reach over 90%, 97, that's when you...
That's when we close them for the out-of-district policy, or I would say restrict. The terminology is closed, but it's restricted to only 3 categories. Employees of students, employees, children. I mean, there's siblings. It's closed for. It's not an open school that anyone can just ask to go to if it's above 97% enrollment.
Why is East then considered that? Because East is like is 94.
Well, we also it's the formula, and it's in our next presentation. So skipping ahead a little bit, we include we talk about it's the functional capacity, and then we subtract off specialized programs. So some of East Middle, when you look at it from one number, includes, I'm in your wheelhouse now a little bit, but the space for the best program, not the way we use it for the best program, but space, you would, maybe that classroom accounts for 25 students on one formula, but we, for the best program only, would use that perhaps for 10 students because of the specialized program, and therefore those numbers, we adjust that. We wouldn't want to have those as open seats for students to go to East Middle, knowing that we restrict that space for a specialized program. So Winfield Elementary would have the same type of thing with the autism program, Wintersville High School as well. So that's a generic description in the big picture.
Thank you.
All right.
So, board members, if there aren't any more questions, I think the follow-up items that we have from this would be if we could do a sensitivity test on that birth to kindergarten ratio, if using the 10-year average would make sense, just to see how much impact that has. So we can look at sort of a high versus a low estimate to see if that impacts our thoughts on what needs to be done from a CIP perspective going forward. And also that it looks like we need to include Carrolltown specifically in the discussions around freedom. Board members, do you agree with that assessment?
Yeah. We need to look at the southern end of the county altogether, I think. I mean, it's just going to trickle up to the middle and then eventually to the high school. So I think we need to just make sure we're balancing it out nicely, I guess. That's a good way to say it.
Does that make sense? Okay.
I'd like to revise a remark I made.
Okay.
Too late.
No, it's not. You'll want me to do this, trust me. So when I said earlier maybe May would be a good time to relook at that, May is probably not a great time to look at that because our intelligent people who sit behind me were reminding me over there that a different way we use this as a planning, these data as a planning tool is for staffing allocations in the spring. So waiting to May would be an impediment to our school directors and our schools for staffing. So if, and I was sort of checking with Bill on how much he could do by when, but if what you just said was to look at the schools that are at 100 over the course of the projections, or if it's not all schools, he could probably rerun those schools with the different 10-year average and be back at the next board meeting, so you could see it sooner than later and make a more informed, have a more informed discussion, and then they would still have a final product by the time they start looking at staffing allocations for the next year.
Well, help me understand it. So if we're changing that assumption on the birth to kindergarten ratio, if we're changing that one assumption, is that something that rolls through your models fairly easily, or is there a lot of gyrations that have to go around that?
So changing that will change the projected kindergartners, and then I have, it's basically a massive Excel spreadsheet. I changed that, it'll change the projected kindergartners, and then it'll give me new projected kindergartners for each elementary, and then I manually, right now I manually enter them into all the schools because they're different spreadsheets and they're not linked. I haven't had a chance to link them yet. It was given to me in the Lotus format so long ago, but I've got it to a point where it's actually manageable. But it's about I would say it takes me a full day's worth of work to do it, but it can be done. But it does roll through all. If I change it there, it's going to change the projected kindergartners for all elementaries.
Okay.
Now I could choose just certain ones to update, but at that point, it's not that much more time just to do it for all the elementaries. And then once those kindergarten numbers are in there, then everything else is formulaic. It's just going to populate.
Bill, is it reasonable to ask you to be able to do that by the February meeting? Because we're also bringing the Freedom Redistricting Committee in for just an update to the board as well. That might coincide kind of nicely.
If it's just that one change, that one scenario, I think I can have that for next meeting, yeah.
Okay. If that's acceptable?
Yep.
Okay. Great. And I think that you're exactly right. I mean, we were going to talk about a Freedom Redistricting Committee update at the February meeting, so I think you're right that this will play well into, okay, well, if we need to add the situation with Carrolltown to the discussion, it'd be better to know that sooner rather than later.
Absolutely, and for communication purposes as well, to our community, to be transparent with what's the conversations that are happening here.
Right.
So.
Right. Okay.
I didn't beat you up too much.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kane. Okay, so we will move on to item 5C, the proposed revisions to board policy JEA, students attending school out of attendance area. Dr. Lockard.
Okay, board members, based on the recent work session we had, as promised, we're returning board policy JEA, students attending school out of attendance area, with some revisions reflecting your discussion. These revisions would be submitted for public comment for 30 days and then returned to you for action. Simultaneously, based on the work session, we're also providing for your information, because really the changes come in the regulations, but the revisions to the administrative regulations for JEA. So Mr. Streaker has already sort of,
whetting your appetite.
Set the table for us. So Carl.
What could be more riveting than talking about out of district? This is great stuff. So the policy, as Dr. Lockhart mentioned, the policy hasn't changed substantially. We did look at it and change a couple of the words in the policy statement. And the purpose, really, instead of trying to define some specific and unique, there are circumstances that would drive the out-of-district approvals and whatnot. So those are the wordings that we changed. Again, very few changes in the policy itself. And again, I just want to remind you that the time crunch that we're on, to an extent, typically, this is the time of year we're approaching where we'd be putting out applications for families to make that out-of-district choice. So the policy would need to go out for comment for 30 days if you're so inclined to do that. And then the regulation, which is where the meat of this is, and I'll cover that, because that's where the substantial changes are based on our work session that we had. So the policy, really, very few changes in the policy, just cleaning up some language globally. I'm going to jump into the regulation where the meat of the changes are. That's more of an information item, but at your direction, we took some time and looked at that. Under the purpose, I think we wanted to clean up the actual practices that have been in place for quite some time and make that very transparent to the public so they understand how we do this. The March 1st deadline is primarily an issue for being considered for the lottery for a school that is closed. Like if a school is under 97% and then it's currently open, and let's say we get 50 people that want to attend there, that would put them over 97. So then we conduct a lottery choosing which families would get in. So that March 1st deadline is about a school that's open and there's higher demand for seats than available, and then we would conduct a lottery. So that's what that's saying, and the purpose about the lottery, where we would be addressing that. Other than that, we've been doing an open, I wouldn't say an open enrollment, but a rolling acceptance of out of district. So I think the feedback that we got was that was not as clear to everyone as it could be. So we've kind of taken this opportunity as we're changing a regulation to spell that out on how we actually operationally do that with input from school principals, school directors, as well as the committee that worked on this. We'll address those things as we go through. Of course, the other focus was athletics. You'll see at the bottom of page 1 on the purpose that we are talking about the participation in athletics, not specifically extracurriculars. They're limited to one out-of-district school. If you attend a subsequent out-of-district school, then you would only be able to participate in your home school or the first out-of-district school for athletics. So we've identified that as an athletics piece. And then the brand new paragraph that's all in caps, students approved for an out-of-district placement to attend a different school from the one in which they're currently enrolled, who are CCPS varsity athletes during the preceding year, will be placed on restricted eligibility for 1 year for the corresponding sport.
Okay.
Yes, Ms.
I do have a question on that. The paragraph above, you've got that a student may be eligible, blah, 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 and then we talk about athletics. And then in the next statement in the bold is they go on restricted eligibility.
Right.
Do you think you should put a meaning, a definition for restricted on there for that? Or do you feel that they will understand that with that paragraph above there? That's
restricted eligibility is defined in the, Eric, help me out with the
I don't see it in here.
It's not defined in this policy, but it's defined in the athletics program, where they define if you're unrestricted eligible, it means you can practice but you can't play.
Okay.
That's through athletics, and
All right.
that's where it's defined now.
I just wanted to make sure that people understood what
We can add, I mean, we certainly could add that if you all think that that's a good place to, so people understand.
I think add a
what it means.
reference,
I think we need to put something there because you look through the whole thing and there's nothing there what restricted eligibility means. And I just think that would be another clarifying point.
I'm totally fine. I mean, would you prefer, I mean, I'm just going to add, would you prefer that we refer to the athletics piece of how they're defining, not there, how it's defined, or embed? I don't really have it would kind of be a standalone right now. That's the only piece when I look at the regulations.
Yeah, I think you can probably just say as defined in policy.
Right.
Okay.
I just think there needs to be something stated there.
I think saying as defined is good. I think for the 30-day comment, that needs to explicitly be put in.
You need
for,
to explain that.
It can be a separate page or whatever, but
What-
I think people need to see what that is if they're
that
going to be commenting.
They may practice, but
And they're not going to look it up.
Right. That is it's the same thing now. There's some circumstances with students that they met certain eligibility for grades and whatnot, then if they've met other criteria, the principal can let them participate in restricted eligibility, meaning practicing with the team but not playing. So
Yes.
you understand
I
it,
know that
just
rule.
trying to get
Yes,
the public
yes,
to
coach many years.
So I can add that to the to that section there on the purpose.
Yeah,
Just
I think so, because
the-
people need to be able to make comment on that, and we need to make sure that's definitely clear.
Put the reference, so clearly, well, I just want to be clear that we're going to add on the restricted eligibility as defined, and is that, Eric, do you know if it's the athletics code? Is it the handbook? Athletics handbook. That's where, we'll check for sure, but we believe it's the athletics.
Carl, what Mr. Kyler was saying was when we put this out for public comment, we need to define
That-
restricted eligibility
That
for
needs to
everybody.
be in there.
So
Yeah.
you might as well just add it in.
Yep. Okay. Yeah,
That way there's
excuse
no
me.
confusion. Restricted eligibility is defined as, spell it out,
Whatever.
and then say, see, you can also see the athletic, whatever for more.
Okay.
That needs to be in there.
That's a good point. Yep. Well, that brings up the point as well, is usually when we send out policies for public comment, do we normally send the administrative regs with it? Or is it usually just the policy? Because the policy has virtually no changes to it. All the meat of what we mean is in the administrative regulations, right?
Right. I don't believe we do send out the regulations. I'm looking to staff for past history.
Board members, you don't want to send out the ARs
Right.
because those are always changeable very quickly. You just send out the policy.
Okay.
The issue is there's just not a lot to the, I mean, there's a little bit of wording, and then that's left open to people, if they're not following along, their own interpretation of
Right.
what's been changed. Maybe what we do is provide some sort of summary of what the changes to the policy means.
Yeah.
And I think we've done that through the work session. I mean, in large measure, the things that we're changing were in the work session as part of the presentation. I believe it's option B. That's essentially what we're going after with some of the feedback the board members gave. That's where we are. We can put it out however we need to. The other challenge is officially we bring regulation for information and policy for approval. Is that right, Ms. Eisenberg?
That's correct.
So that, but in this, I mean, this is an issue that we just want to, with your input, we want to get it as right as we can make it. We know there's going to be challenges no matter what we do, but we want to get it.
Yeah, we need to get it done before your time, we got to do your timeline, so.
Right, and I totally agree. I'm just thinking about the logistics of that. Like typically, we only send out the policy for public comment, but there's not really, I mean, we're changing literally one word
Correct. Very minimal change.
in the policy. It's all about
And
the
that-
meat of the regs,
Yeah.
but if we don't really want to send out the regs, or maybe, but we're saying that we would send out the regs for information purposes only, or no?
Don't do that.
I think we
Okay.
could attach, however, whatever the option was.
Like
that
the option
captured
B and like a summary of.
summary of,
the
this
change.
is what the changes to the policy indicate, and attach that to it as opposed to the whole written out regulation.
You can do that.
Okay.
Yeah, because
Without that, it's a waste of.
that's
Together,
exactly
it's
right.
a waste
Nobody
to
will
send out.
understand what we're changing.
I agree.
Okay, I'm now.
No, you're-
This is
you're
my
right.
topic, I'm sorry, I'll get my
You're
blood
right.
pressure back on now. I'm
Blood
good. Yeah, I know.
pressure, it's passion. It's passion.
I know, it's passion.
We appreciate passion.
Okay, so a summary of the major implications of option B.
Sorry.
Summary of the changes, what option B is. I mean, essentially, we'll kind of summarize the changes. We'll put something together.
Okay.
I mean, I think, to the large extent, I think it's already there. I think it's a matter of just me cleaning it up. I'm fine doing that.
I did have a coach reach out to me, and they had said they would like to see actually something even say, if and when the student completes the required tryout of the sport. Because they said, we're doing this because we've been hearing in the county that children, students are going to another school and they've been pulled there for another sport, basically, and then, they're here and they're playing this sport. That something needs to be also stated that you have to try it out for it.
Well, we would only have a student try out if there's a sport that has cuts. For example, many of our football teams, they don't have cuts. So there's no tryout for varsity football in many of our schools because they don't cut students. Whereas I would think in many of our basketball programs we have cuts. I mean, I'm not the athletics expert here, but in that extent, and we do expect students to have to try out as they come in. And that, I don't know that that's appropriately in the regulations for out of district. I mean, our focus is out of district with this regulation.
Yeah.
I believe trying out is more of an athletics piece, not an out of district piece.
But that's part of the problem, is they're going out of district for a particular sport, so they want something that says, if you're doing that, you still have to try out if this is what's going to...
Just like a student who moves into the area, regardless of their out of district, a student new to the school has to try out. So a student could move into the area, be going from one school to another for a home school, and we still have the same situation. This wouldn't address that at all. So again, I don't know that I want to try to... I don't think the purpose of our out-of-district situation, as far as what we're trying to address through our regulations, is mandating how sports are run. It's more about how can a student go or not go to a school. Once they get there, we have other governing pieces that kind of take care of that right now. I hear that concern, but I don't know that this is the right way to address it. I do think, as far as our fall sports, we get into a timeline that's put in here, and I'll cover that in a minute. I think we're covered very well for our fall sports already because the out-of-district guidelines of when we're going to accept out-of-districts are restricted through that. So let me just continue this, just going through where we are, like a couple changes I think that are note. We talked earlier about the 97% being our cutoff if we're over 97%. That's in scope on page 2. We added a line for capacity utilized for special programs, just to make sure we're not going to, that we account for that space, because that space isn't open to a student just generally moving into the area. So we're capturing that there. The other piece on procedure, that's number 4 on page 3. The application submitted by March 1st, again, talking about that's for the lottery, the purpose of the lottery. March 1st deadline is all about lottery in case we're below 97, and then the demand for seats would exceed 97. And then I think the other substantive change is in page 4 in this section. Application supporting documentation will be accepted as outlined below. This is to be more open about, this is the practice that's pretty much been in place. We just want to kind of put that right out there, that the deadline for applications March 1st for the lottery. Rolling applications will be accepted through July 31st. So through the end of July, we'll accept applications for out of district for schools that remain open below 97%. And then we'll start them in the beginning of the year after Q1 through the end of Q3. Because we're actually doing that now. We'll get out of district requests time to time throughout the year where a family's in a situation asking, and we'd like to go out of district to a different school. That can happen. We literally have one, Mr. Mongol, like this week. I think today we were talking about one. So those pieces come up, and just clearly defining that we have situations that families would like to go to a different school. Through the out-of-district process, we generally don't accept them during the first quarter. We need students to settle in, get how is it going, and if something after Q1 comes up and there's a family that's looking for change, we'll accept that. We're also noting that students will only be approved for one out-of-district placement during a school year. So a student isn't applying out-of-district to out-of-district to out-of-district throughout the process. So I think that clearly defines the timeline that we're doing this, the deadline. So a student can apply April 15th for an out-of-district, as long as it's not to a school that's approaching 97%, it's open just as it is now, that student would be approved. If that school would become closed, then that March 1st deadline we would hold into play. So that's all the rest of this is the other changes. Like in E, the change is all about the time frame and the March 1st being notified if you're applying for out of district for a lottery situation. If you meet the March 1st deadline, we'll let you know by April 1st. And then following that, we'll give you 10 school days that we'll let you know. There's a change. So with that, are any other questions about where we are?
Thank you.
So we'll make those changes. I'll do a summary, and we'll get that out so people have feedback. Again, just to remind the board, timelines. We're comfortable because the March 1st deadline is strictly for the lottery. We're changing what we do as far as we would usually get that out now. So we're comfortable with the idea that if we get to the February board meeting and it's approved and we move forward, we would put the applications out People would have about, give or take, 2 weeks at that time to get those applications in that are lottery sensitive, for lack of a better term. Beyond that, it wouldn't be an issue because we're fine all the way through July 31st. Okay? Thank you.
Great. Mr. Streeter, thank you. I think this was really well done, starting with the work session. I think it was an excellent work session, very productive, and I think these changes were well thought out and we're in good shape, and we recognize the need for urgency, so I think we're on a good path.
Just one question. So all this passes. I got little Johnny, who's a 9th grader at Man Valley, football quarterback. He wants to go to Westminster. I apply. How do I know that he's going to be ineligible? Is that going to be in the information?
Well, if Johnny's a current freshman and didn't play varsity at
No,
Man
he
Valley-
did. He started
He played
varsity.
varsity?
You know, in other words, I want to break this rule.
My freshman that was a varsity star athlete at Manchester Valley wants now to go to Westminster to be the quarterback, just so we're on the same page.
Yep.
They apply for the out-of-district. What we'll be doing is we would approve them for the out-of-district. I'm just thinking through, we haven't ironed that out completely,
Oh, I
Mr.
know.
Kyler. But we would approve the student for out-of-district. Now, they can always participate in their home school. But I will be honest and say that until this is approved, we haven't thought through exactly the detail
How
of
soon they'd hear.
we then need to get with athletic directors. Here's the students who have been approved for out of district, right? So in my mind, right now, off the top of my head, I'm doing this, which could be scary for everybody, but we're going to say, here's the list of students who are approved for out of district. Only for high school kids is this an issue. We'll get that list to athletic directors. Athletic directors would review that for varsity status athletes. Then we would make sure that we'd communicate with the family. You do understand that if you go to Westminster High School, you can participate as a restricted eligibility. And that student may say, oh my gosh, well then I don't want to go. Certainly that would be their privilege, you know. And I'm not sure on the athletics piece if that student as a 9th grader could then play JV. I don't know if once you're varsity you can't go. Mr. Duffy would answer that better than I. Right. I would agree they wouldn't want to. But we will certainly notify them before tryouts. You know, that's important for that family to know.
And Ms. Taglit, I just would like to say, I hear the concern that you had. You had it at the work session as well as here. I agree with Mr. Streeter that that's not really something to be with the tryouts. That's not really pertinent to this, but if that's a question that you had from an athletics perspective, I think that we should follow up behind the scenes with
No,
Mr.
I just
Duffy.
worry that someone's going to bring it and be like, well, according to this, my kid is automatically in there to play, but they're going to sit on the sidelines. Like, that's just, when I look at that, that's what I see as a parent coming forward and going, well, your policy says my kid's going to sit on the sideline. They didn't have to try out.
And we would refer to the athletic handbook, but the tryout is mandated. Like, as Mr. Streeter said, if a student moves in today to a non-cut sport, there's a process with the physical and everything they have to go to.
Right.
They're never guaranteed to be in a wrestling match, but they could be kept on the team. So, I mean, tryouts is a mandated process for all sports.
Or they could have come from a school, participated in that,
Yes.
and wrestling in another school, get the physical, and they could come in and bump the current kid who's wrestling the 150-pound weight class because that student athlete out-wrestles the other 150-pounder. That's the challenge. So, again, that could happen any given day in Carroll County Public Schools.
That's why I was saying, I like they see something, and that was the concern that I had received, was there's something needs to be see athletic
This is about
XYZ.
students' ability to attend the school. That's the out-of-districts. Can you go to the school, and whether or not you can participate in athletics based on your participation in athletics the year before as to whether or not you're a varsity athlete. I think that's the scope of this
And I will
regulation.
review the tryout information
tryouts.
with Mr. Duffy in the handbook so to make sure it's crystal clear.
They're very important, but I don't see them here. I think they're in the athletics area.
I agree, and I think we should follow up with that as a separate item.
Thank you.
Okay. Great. Okay, and we do need to take a quick break for technical purposes, and we will come back in 5, please, everyone. Thank you.